Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to stand on a planet completely covered in ice? To see the whole Earth as one giant snowball floating in space? Every ocean frozen solid. Every continent buried beneath glaciers so thick they reached into the sky like frozen mountains. Can you imagine the profound silence of a world locked in ice, when no waves lap against any shore, when no rain falls from any cloud, where the only sound for millions of years is the patient creaking of glaciers slowly flowing towards seas that no longer exist? What would you see in that alien landscape of endless white? Perhaps the shimmer of ice crystals catching sunlight that has traveled 93 million miles only to be reflected back to space. Or the blue shadows in glacial crevasses so deep they seem to reach toward the planet's frozen heart. Or the aurora dancing above a world so still it seems to have stopped breathing. Have you ever held an ice cube and felt that shock of cold against your palm, and wondered what it would be like if that cold embraced an entire planet? If that frozen stillness lasted not for moments, but for millions of years? Yet somehow, impossibly, life found a way to persist in the darkness beneath the ice. What would it mean to witness the greatest transformation in our planet's history? To watch as Earth became a frozen pearl in the darkness of space. And then, even more remarkably, to see it awaken again. If journeys through deep time bring you the same wonder they bring me, if you find peace in these ancient memories, please consider liking and subscribing to follow along for more. And if someone you care about might appreciate drifting through Earth's memories as they drift off to sleep, why not share this gift of wonder with them? I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight, and what time you're settling in for this journey. Leave a comment below. Let me know what corner of our modern Earth you call home. And if there are other moments in deep time you'd like to explore together, other ancient memories you'd like me to share, tell me in the comments. Your suggestions guide our future travels. But for now, let's leave the modern world behind. Settle in now. Let the weight of your day become a distant memory. Breathe in the quiet of your room, and with your exhale, let the present moment gently drift away. We are not bound by clocks or calendars tonight. Together, we will step outside of time, to a place I remember well, a world waiting in the deep past. I am the Chrononaut, and I have drifted through the ages like smoke through still air. Tonight, I invite you to join me on a journey. Not forward, not back, but deeper, into the memory of Earth itself. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Feel yourself becoming lighter, untethered from this moment, ready to slip between the seconds and find yourself in a time before time was counted. Come with me now. Let us cross the threshold together. We are traveling back 650 million years to an Earth that would seem utterly alien to you. This is the Neoproterozoic era, a time when the continents bore no resemblance to the maps you know, when complex life was still finding its first forms, when the planet itself was about to undergo one of the most dramatic transformations in its long history. I have come to show you the Snowball Earth, a time when ice conquered the world so completely that our planet became a giant white marble suspended in space. It is a story of apparent death and hidden life, of a world locked in frozen silence for millions of years, and of the spectacular awakening that followed. But we begin before the ice, in a world that is warm and thriving, to understand the magnitude of what is about to unfold. I find myself floating above an Earth that glows with life. The continents are clustered near the equator in a configuration your scientists call Rodinia, though this ancient supercontinent is already beginning to break apart. The land masses stretch for thousands of miles in unfamiliar shapes, their coastlines bearing no resemblance to the world you know. Shallow seas, warm and teeming with microscopic organisms, cover vast areas that will one day be dry land. The atmosphere contains oxygen now, though less than in your time, perhaps 15% compared to your 21. This oxygen is the gift of billions of years of photosynthesis, the patient work of cyanobacteria that learned to harvest sunlight and exhale the gas that would transform the world. The sky has a different quality here, deeper, more violet at the horizons. The blue somehow more intense, without the pollutants of your era. I descend to skim above these ancient seas, observing the life that thrives here. The water is crystal clear in most places, unmarred by the sediments that cloud modern oceans. In the shallows, vast meadows of microbial mats carpet the seafloor. Communities of bacteria living in layered harmony, each species occupying its preferred depth within the mat. The top layers are green with photosynthetic cyanobacteria. Below them, purple sulfur bacteria harvest light that the upper layers let through. Deeper still, chemosynthetic bacteria work in darkness, processing the waste products of those above. These mats are the powerhouses of this ancient world, pumping oxygen into the atmosphere, building limestone reefs atom by atom, creating the first soils as they creep onto land. They have dominated Earth's shallow seas for nearly 3 billion years, and they show no signs of relinquishing their reign. But there are newcomers in these waters, organisms that represent a fundamental innovation in the story of life. I observe them with particular interest, for they are eukaryotes, cells with nuclei, mitochondria, and other internal structures. They are larger than bacteria, more complex, capable of behaviors their simpler cousins cannot achieve. Some of these eukaryotes have taken the first tentative steps toward multicellularity. I watch a colony of cells that normally live independently come together in response to a chemical signal. They form a temporary slug-like creature that can move as a unit, seeking better conditions. When they find a suitable spot, they disperse again into individual cells. It is not true multicellularity, not yet, but it hints at possibilities to come. In deeper waters, I encounter the Ediacaran fauna, though they will not be named this for another 30 million years. These are Earth's first experiments with large body size, and they are strange beyond description. Insomnia glides along the seafloor, flat as a pancake, its quilted surface rippling with mysterious purpose. It can grow to 3 feet across, but is only a fraction of an inch thick. It has no mouth, no gut, no obvious sense organs. It feeds, apparently, by absorbing nutrients directly through its skin as it creeps over bacterial mats. Nearby, a grove of Charnia sways in the gentle current. These look like ferns or seaweed, but they are animals, or at least they are not plants. They have no ability to photosynthesize, instead filtering organic particles from the water with their frond-like bodies. Some grow 6 feet tall, anchored to the seafloor by holdfasts like primitive roots. The most alien of all is Tribrachidium, a dish-shaped creature with 3-fold symmetry. Not the bilateral symmetry that will dominate later life, but a 3-part body plan that evolution will soon abandon. It sits on the seafloor, possibly filtering food from the water, possibly absorbing nutrients from below. No one in your time is quite sure how it lived, and watching it now, I understand their confusion. It is life, but life following rules that will soon be forgotten. This is a peaceful world. There are no predators here, no hunters, no need for armor or speed or camouflage. the ediacaran creatures exist in what seems like harmony, each occupying its niche without competition. They reproduce slowly, grow slowly, live slowly. Time means little in this garden of strange forms. But I am here because I know this piece is about to end, not through the evolution of predation, that will come later, but through a transformation so complete, it will seem like the end of the world itself. I begin to sense the first signs of change in the subtle shift of ocean currents. Rodinea's breakup is accelerating, rifts opening between continental blocks that have been joined for hundreds of millions of years. As the supercontinent fragments, the geography of the planet is reorganizing itself. New ocean basins open while others close. Mountain ranges rise where continents collide, only to be worn down by erosion. This geological upheaval has consequences beyond changing maps. The breakup of Rodinia is redirecting the flow of ocean currents that carry warm water from equator to poles. Where once the currents formed simple, efficient loops, now they meander and eddy, their heat dissipating before reaching high latitudes. The polar regions, always cool, begin to grow colder. More significantly, the exposure of fresh rock to the atmosphere accelerates chemical weathering. Rain, made slightly acidic by dissolved carbon dioxide, attacks the newly exposed stone. The weathering process pulls carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, locking it away in carbonate minerals. It's a process that has always occurred, but the breakup of Rodinia has suddenly exposed vast areas of fresh rock surface. The planet's natural carbon sequestration has shifted into overdrive. Volcanic activity, usually a source of warming greenhouse gases, has paradoxically diminished. The rifting of continents is primarily a passive process here, not driven by the vigorous volcanism that often accompanies such events. The great basaltic eruptions that periodically reset Earth's climate are absent. The volcanoes that do erupt are mostly on land, where their ash and sulfur compounds have a cooling effect, reflecting sunlight back to space. I watch from orbit as the polar ice caps, always present in this era, begin to expand. The growth is subtle at first, a few miles per year, barely noticeable on a planetary scale. The ice is brilliantly white, reflecting 90% of the sunlight that strikes it back into space. Dark ocean water, by contrast, absorbs 90% of the sun's energy. As ice replaces water at high latitudes, less heat is retained by the Earth system. This creates what scientists of your time call a positive feedback loop, though there is nothing positive about its effects. More ice means more reflection, which means cooler temperatures, which means more ice. It is a runaway process, and once it reaches a critical threshold, it becomes self-sustaining. The first life forms to feel the change are those in the shallow polar seas. The microbial mats that have thrived here for millions of years begin to slow their growth as temperatures drop. The ediacaran fauna, adapted to stable, warm conditions, start to disappear from higher latitudes. Some migrate toward the equator. Others simply vanish, their strange body plans unsuited to the new reality. I follow the ice edge as it creeps equatorward, year by year, decade by decade, century by century. The advance is inexorable, but not uniform. Some years the ice retreats slightly during warm summers, giving false hope. But the overall trend is unmistakable. The white is winning. By 645 million years ago, the ice sheets have reached what you would call the temperate zones. Glaciers miles thick grind their way across continents. Their weight so immense, it depresses the very crust of the Earth. The bedrock beneath bends and cracks under the pressure, creating deep fractures that will persist long after the ice is gone. The glaciers move like slow rivers, flowing from high accumulation zones where snow falls faster than it melts to lower regions, where they finally meet warmer conditions. But warmer is relative. Even at the ice edge, temperatures rarely rise above freezing. The glaciers carve icebergs into the shrinking seas, creating armadas of floating mountains that drift equatorward until they finally melt. I spend years following a single glacier as it carves its way across what will one day be Australia. The ice is not pure white, but layered with bands of embedded dust and rock. These dark layers absorb more heat than clean ice, creating zones of weakness where the glacier cracks and shifts. The sounds it makes are otherworldly. Groans that last for hours, sharp cracks like thunder that echo across the frozen landscape, the constant whisper of ice crystals reforming under pressure. Beneath the glacier, I discover a hidden world. The pressure and friction create a thin layer of liquid water at the ice-rock interface. In this microscopic space, life persists. Bacteria adapted to extreme cold and pressure form thin biofilms on the rock surface. They metabolize incredibly slowly. A single cell division might take months, but they survive. They are the most patient organisms on Earth, waiting in darkness for conditions to change. As the ice advances, it doesn't simply cover the land, it transforms it. Mountains are ground down to their roots, their debris carried hundreds of miles and deposited in moraines. Valleys are carved deep and wide, their V-shapes reformed into U-shaped troughs. The ice sculpts the land like an artist working in negative space, removing material to reveal new forms beneath. The oceans are changing too. As more water becomes locked in ice, sea levels drop dramatically. 300 feet, then 600, then more. Continental shelves that have been submerged for millions of years emerge into frigid air. Land bridges appear between previously isolated land masses. The geography of Earth is being rewritten by ice. The falling sea levels expose vast areas of seafloor, killing the communities that lived there. Coral-like structures built by ancient organisms over millions of years find themselves high and dry, their polyps dying in the freezing air. The newly exposed land quickly freezes solid, adding to the planet's reflective surface. But it's in the atmosphere that I observe some of the most dramatic changes. As the oceans shrink and cool, evaporation decreases. The air becomes progressively drier. Clouds, those great moderators of temperature, become rare. Without water vapor, the most important greenhouse gas, the atmosphere loses much of its ability to retain heat. The sky takes on an alien quality. By day, it is a deep dark blue, almost purple at zenith. The sun seems smaller, harder, its light carrying less warmth across the growing expanses of ice. By night, the stars blaze with an intensity impossible in your moisture-laden atmosphere. The aurora, when they appear, are spectacular beyond description. Curtains of green and red and purple light dancing across a crystal-clear sky. And still the ice advances. I position myself at what was once a thriving equatorial reef, now locked beneath a thickening skin of sea ice. The water below is still liquid, but it is cut off from the atmosphere, from sunlight, from the exchange of gases that life requires. The temperature hovers just above freezing, warm by the standards of this dying world, but cold enough to slow metabolism to a crawl. The reef is dying, but not quickly. The colonial organisms that built these calcium carbonate structures can survive for remarkable periods without food. They pull their polyps deep into their protective skeletons and wait. Days pass, then weeks, then months. One by one, they succumb. not to cold, but to starvation in the darkness. The mobile creatures fare somewhat better. Fish-like organisms, not true fish, which haven't evolved yet, but swimmers with primitive notochords, migrate to the shrinking areas of open water. They congregate in ever denser schools, competing for the dwindling resources. Their world is contracting, and they have nowhere else to go. By 640 million years ago, the ice has reached the tropics. This has never happened before in Earth's history. Even during previous ice ages, some spanning millions of years, the equatorial regions remained warm, providing refuge for life. But now, even these last sanctuaries are threatened. I watch as the final patches of open ocean near the equator begin to freeze. The process is different here than at higher latitudes. The intense tropical sun creates a daily cycle of melting and refreezing. During the day, the surface ice becomes slushy, almost breaking up. But each night it refreezes, and each day the breakup comes a little later, until finally the ice persists through the full daily cycle. With grim fascination, I observe the last day of open water on Earth. It is a small patch of ocean, perhaps 100 miles across, surrounded by encroaching ice. The water is thick with life. Everything that could migrate here has done so. The density of organisms is so great that the water has taken on a greenish-brown color from the mass of photosynthetic cells. Let me slow time itself and witness the physics of this final freezing. The molecular ballet that will lock Earth in ice for 20 million years. As evening approaches, I descend to the very surface of the water, where liquid meets air in that ancient boundary that has defined oceans since their birth. The water temperature is 31.8 degrees Fahrenheit, just 0.4 of a degree above the freezing point of seawater. The salt content is higher than normal ocean water, 36 parts per thousand instead of the usual 35, concentrated by the evaporation of millennia. This extra salt is the only thing keeping these final waters liquid as temperatures plummet. I watch the first ice crystal form. It begins with a single water molecule that, in its random thermal motion, happens to align perfectly with 6 neighboring molecules. For a billionth of a second, they form a tiny hexagonal lattice. But thermal energy tears it apart. The temperature drops another 1/10 of a degree. Another crystal nucleus forms, survives a nanosecond longer, then dissolves. But now the process accelerates. At 31.6 degrees, the nucleation threshold is crossed. A crystal forms around a speck of dust. Volcanic ash blown from a distant eruption. And this time, it holds. The hexagonal lattice of ice spreads outward as more water molecules lock into the crystalline structure. Each molecule gives up the freedom of liquid motion for the rigid order of solid ice. The physics are inexorable. In liquid water, molecules tumble and slide past each other in constant chaotic motion. But as they freeze, they arrange themselves in a pattern that has remained unchanged for billions of years. Each oxygen atom bonded to 4 others in a perfect tetrahedral arrangement, creating a structure more open, less dense than the liquid from which it forms. This decrease in density has profound consequences. The ice crystal floats upward, seeking the surface like a tiny iceberg. It encounters other crystals, and they fuse, their lattices merging with the soft click of hydrogen bonds forming. The aggregate grows, doubling in size every few seconds, until it breaks the surface tension and appears as a visible fleck of white. I expand my perspective to watch thousands of such crystals forming simultaneously across the cooling surface. The nucleation is not random. It follows patterns dictated by wind currents, temperature gradients, the distribution of microscopic particles that serve as freezing points. The ice forms in delicate fern-like patterns, fractals of crystallization that branch and rebranch as they spread. Within the water, the formation of ice crystals has another effect. It concentrates the salt. As pure water locks into ice crystals, the dissolved sodium chloride is rejected, expelled into the remaining liquid. This creates pockets of hypersaline water, dense and heavy, that sink toward the bottom of the sea. Even in these final moments, the ocean circulates, driven by the physics of freezing. The microbial community responds to this crystalline invasion with strategies honed over billions of years of evolution. Cyanobacteria begin producing antifreeze proteins, molecular marvels that bind to growing ice crystals and inhibit their growth. These proteins, shaped like tiny molecular scissors, slip between the water molecules and disrupt the perfect hexagonal lattice, forcing the ice to curve and twist in ways that slow its formation. Other microbes withdraw their cellular contents, concentrating their cytoplasm like antifreeze, allowing their interior temperature to drop below the freezing point of pure water without forming deadly ice crystals. Still others release cryoprotectant compounds, sugars and alcohols that lower the freezing point of the water around them, creating microscopic zones of persistent liquid. But the thermal energy is draining from the system faster than life can adapt. The air temperature is now 15 degrees below freezing, and the thermal differential drives heat from the water into the atmosphere at an accelerating rate. Each calorie lost to the frigid air is a calorie no longer available to keep molecules in motion. I watch as the ice crystals, initially separate and delicate, begin to mesh together. The fragile ice, tiny platelets suspended in the water, coalesces into slush. The slush thickens into a continuous sheet that flexes and bends with the waves, but no longer breaks apart. The membrane between ocean and atmosphere begins to solidify. Below this forming ice sheet, the water temperature drops more slowly. The ice acts as insulation, moderating the heat loss, but it also cuts off the exchange of gases with the atmosphere. Photosynthetic organisms accustomed to pulling carbon dioxide from the air must now extract it from the dissolved store in seawater. That store is finite, and it's shrinking with every bubble of gas produced. The ice sheet thickens from above and below simultaneously. Heat radiates upward into the frigid air, cooling the upper surface of the ice until it reaches the air temperature of -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Meanwhile, the liquid water below continues to give up heat, and new ice forms at the bottom of the sheet, crystal by crystal, inch by inch. I observe the interface between ice and water, a boundary as sharp as a knife edge, yet fuzzy with molecular activity. Here, water molecules make split-second decisions about their allegiance. Join the ordered crystal lattice above or remain in the chaotic liquid below. Temperature rules these decisions with thermodynamic tyranny. As more heat is lost, more molecules choose the crystalline path. The sounds of freezing are subtle but constant. Each time a water molecule locks into the ice crystal lattice, it releases a quantum of energy, not enough to hear, but trillions upon trillions of these microscopic events create a whisper, like the softest rainfall. It's the sound of order emerging from chaos, of freedom surrendering to structure, of the molecular basis of life itself being constrained by physics. Within hours, the ice sheet has grown to 18 inches thick. Waves can no longer break its surface, though the water below continues to move, driven by thermal currents and the momentum of millions of years of circulation. The sheet flexes and groans, developing stress fractures that immediately seal with new ice formation. What was once a dynamic interface between ocean and atmosphere has become a solid barrier. The microbial life trapped below faces a crisis unprecedented in Earth's history. For 3.5 billion years, life has depended on the exchange of materials and energy across the ocean surface. Now that exchange is cut off. The oxygen dissolved in the water is all there will be until the ice melts. The nutrients cycling between water and air are trapped on one side or the other of the frozen boundary. Yet life adapts even to this ultimate constraint. I watch as photosynthetic organisms, cut off from atmospheric carbon dioxide, begin to photosynthesize using bicarbonate dissolved in seawater. It's less efficient, yielding less energy per photon of sunlight, but it works. The organisms grow more slowly, reproduce less frequently, but they persist. Others abandon photosynthesis altogether. Bacteria that have used sunlight for energy since the dawn of life switch to chemosynthesis, extracting energy from the sulfur compounds and metals dissolved in seawater. It's like a factory retooling its entire production line in response to a resource shortage. Inefficient at first, but gradually optimizing. The ice continues to thicken. 2 feet, 3 feet, 5 feet. The weight begins to depress the ice sheet, pushing it below the waterline. Water seeps up through cracks and refreezes, adding mass to the growing barrier. The thermal mass of the ice sheet grows so large that it begins to moderate its own environment, insulating the water below from the extreme cold above. By dawn, the ice is 8 feet thick over most of the remaining oases. Only at the very center, where thermal springs from the deep ocean still send up plumes of slightly warmer water, does a small pool of liquid remain. It's perhaps 20 feet across, dark as obsidian in the pale light of sunrise, steaming in the frigid air. The organisms that once filled an ocean now crowd into this final sanctuary. The density of life is staggering. Billions of cells per drop of water. They exist in layers, each species occupying its preferred depth in the water column. At the top, those most tolerant of cold. At the bottom, those most dependent on the warmth rising from below. Competition is fierce but brief. As the day progresses and the air temperature fails to rise above -30 degrees Fahrenheit, ice crystals begin forming even in this final pool. The dissolved salts and organic compounds provide some protection, lowering the freezing point to 28 degrees. But physics is relentless. I watch the last square yard of liquid water on Earth's surface as it undergoes the phase transition from liquid to solid. The process is violent at the molecular level. Billions of water molecules suddenly locked into crystalline imprisonment. The ice forms not smoothly but in spurts and jumps, as thermal energy fluctuations briefly favor freezing, then melting, then freezing again. But the trend is inexorable. By evening, only a patch the size of a dinner table remains liquid. By midnight, it shrunk to the size of a book, and then, in a moment that marks one of the most significant transitions in Earth's history, the last water molecule on the surface joins the crystalline lattice of ice. The Snowball Earth has begun. From orbit, the planet now appears as I will remember it for the next 20 million years. A perfect white sphere, almost featureless in its uniformity. But having witnessed the molecular details of its formation, I know that this apparent simplicity masks incredible complexity. Every ice crystal in that global shell tells a story of thermal physics, of molecular behavior, of life's desperate adaptations to the ultimate winter. The silence is profound. Without liquid water to evaporate, there are no clouds to drift across the sky. Without temperature gradients to drive circulation, There are no winds to howl across the surface. The only sounds are the deep groans of ice settling under its own weight and the sharp cracks of thermal expansion and contraction. Yet within that ice, and in the liquid refugia far below, the molecular machinery of life continues its patient work. Proteins fold and unfold. DNA replicates with careful precision. Metabolism proceeds at a pace measured not in seconds or minutes, but in hours and days. Life has not stopped. It has simply shifted into a lower gear, conserving energy for the long winter ahead. I drift above a world transformed beyond recognition. From space, Earth no longer resembles the blue marble of your time. It has become a perfect white sphere, as featureless as a cue ball, reflecting the sun's light back into the darkness of space with terrible efficiency. The only breaks in the whiteness are occasional dark spots, where the peaks of the highest mountains thrust above the ice, and even these are soon covered by snow. The statistics of this frozen world defy comprehension. The ice is 3 miles thick over what were once tropical continents. Over the oceans, it averages half a mile thick, though in some places it reaches much deeper. The weight is so immense, millions of billions of tons, that it has actually deformed the planet, flattening it slightly at the equator, changing its rotation rate by a measurable fraction. The average global temperature has plummeted to negative 60 degrees Fahrenheit. At the poles, temperatures drop to negative 120 degrees, cold enough to freeze carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. At the equator, the warmest place on the planet, noon temperatures might reach negative 10 degrees. There is no place on Earth where water can exist in liquid form on the surface. The atmosphere itself has been transformed. With all water locked in ice, there are no clouds, no rain, no weather as you understand it. The air is thin, dry, crystal clear. Atmospheric pressure has dropped by 20% as gases freeze out or become trapped in ice. The wind still blows, driven by temperature differences between day and night, but it carries no moisture, only fine ice crystals that glitter like diamond dust. I descend to the surface to experience this frozen world at ground level. The ice sheet is not smooth, but carved into fantastic shapes by the dry wind. Sastrugi, wind-carved ridges, march across the surface in parallel ranks, some reaching 30 feet high. In places, the wind has scoured hollows that spiral down into the ice, creating blue shadowed depths of extraordinary beauty. The sounds here are unlike anything in your experience. The ice constantly shifts and settles under its own weight, creating a symphony of cracks, groans, and whispers. Sometimes, deep within the ice sheet, a massive fracture propagates for miles, its passage marked by a low rumble that seems to come from the earth itself. The wind, when it blows, creates harmonic overtones as it passes through the carved ice formations. An alien music for an alien world. But it's the light that is most extraordinary. With no atmospheric moisture to scatter sunlight, shadows are absolutely black, sharp-edged as knife blades. The ice acts as a billion-faceted prism, breaking the sun's light into rainbow spectra that shift and dance with every change of angle. At sunrise and sunset, the entire landscape glows with colors that have no names, deeper than rose, purer than gold, more electric than any blue your eyes have seen. I follow the sun's path across this frozen world, observing how life, for life does persist, has adapted to the ultimate winter. In places where volcanic heat reaches the surface, small patches of liquid water persist. These hot springs are islands of warmth in a frozen ocean, their steaming pools often no more than a few feet across. Around one such spring, I observe a complete ecosystem in miniature. The water is near boiling at its source, cooling rapidly as it flows away from the volcanic vent. Different organisms occupy different temperature zones with exquisite precision. Thermophilic bacteria cluster closest to the source, thriving in water that would cook most organisms. A few inches away, where temperatures drop below 150 degrees, different species take over. The diversity in this tiny space is remarkable. I count dozens of bacterial species, each with its own metabolic strategy, its own preferred temperature range, its own role in the microscopic ecosystem. Some photosynthesize, using the dim light that filters through the steam. Others are chemosynthetic, harvesting energy from hydrogen sulfide and other volcanic gases. Still others are predators, absorbing smaller cells or breaking down the dead. But most remarkably, there are eukaryotes here, complex cells with nuclei, the ancestors of all multicellular life. They occupy the cooler edges of the pool, where temperatures are merely tropical rather than scalding. Some have developed symbiotic relationships with bacteria, harboring them within their cells in exchange for nutrients. These partnerships, forged in the crucible of the Snowball Earth, will persist through all subsequent evolution. The mitochondria in your cells are the descendants of such a partnership. The hot spring is not isolated. Beneath the ice, a network of cracks and channels connects it to other thermal areas. I follow these hidden pathways, observing how organisms migrate between oases. It's a dangerous journey. The channels often freeze and reopen, trapping and crushing cells. But enough survive to maintain genetic flow between populations, preventing inbreeding and allowing evolution to continue. I discover that the most extensive refugia exist not on the surface but deep beneath the ice, where the frozen ocean meets the seafloor. Here, miles below the ice ceiling, volcanic vents create extensive areas of liquid water. The pressure at these depths is immense, hundreds of times atmospheric pressure, but life has adapted. Let me descend into one of these underwater oases and witness the intricate biochemistry that sustains life in Earth's darkest hour. The vent field stretches across 15 acres of sea floor, 2.5 miles beneath the ice ceiling, where the pressure reaches 400 atmospheres and would crush any surface dweller in an instant. The water here is a complex chemical soup, rich with dissolved minerals leaching from volcanic rock. Hydrogen sulfide bubbles up in concentrations that would be lethal to most organisms. But here it serves as the fundamental energy source for an entire ecosystem. The temperature gradients are extreme. Water at the vent mouths reaches 700 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt lead, while just feet away it drops to near freezing. At the base of this alien food web are chemosynthetic bacteria that have mastered the art of extracting energy from chemical bonds rather than sunlight. I focus on a single bacterium, a microscopic sphere barely visible at 1,000th of an inch across, as it performs the metabolic miracle that sustains all life here. Within its cell membrane, specialized enzymes called chemosynthetic complexes harvest electrons from hydrogen sulfide molecules. These electrons cascade through a series of protein machines embedded in the cell membrane, each transfer releasing energy that powers the synthesis of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the universal energy currency of life. It's the same process that occurs in your muscle cells when you move, but instead of using oxygen and glucose, these bacteria use sulfur and hydrogen. The byproducts of this metabolism are as important as the energy it produces. Each bacterium exhales elementary sulfur, creating vast deposits that coat the seafloor in yellow crystals. Others produce sulfuric acid, creating pools of water acidic enough to dissolve metal. Still others combine carbon dioxide with hydrogen to create organic compounds. The first links in a food chain that exists entirely without sunlight. These bacterial communities form complex three-dimensional structures that rival coral reefs in their diversity. I observe bacterial mats that grow in terraced formations, each layer optimized for specific temperature and chemical conditions. At the hottest zones, hyperthermophilic bacteria form crimson carpets that thrive at temperatures that would cook proteins from any other organism. Moving outward from the heat source, the bacterial community changes with mathematical precision. Orange sulfur oxidizing bacteria dominate the zones where temperatures range from 300 to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Beyond them, white mats of methanotrophic bacteria consume methane seeping from sediments. At the cool edges, where temperatures drop below 100 degrees, purple photosynthetic bacteria attempt to capture the dim red glow of heated rock. The architecture of these bacterial cities is breathtaking. Chimney-like structures rise 20 feet from the sea floor, built not of rock, but of precipitated minerals and bacterial secretions. The bacteria don't merely live on these structures. They create them, secreting proteins that bind dissolved metals and minerals into solid formations. Iron, copper, zinc, lead, all the metals of the modern industrial world, accumulate in these biological skyscrapers. Within the chimneys, the bacterial ecosystem creates its own microclimate. Temperature gradients provide distinct niches for different species. Chemical gradients create zones of varying acidity and mineral content. Pressure gradients, tiny though they are, create subtle variations in density that different organisms exploit. I focus on a single chimney and discover it contains no fewer than 200 distinct species of bacteria, each occupying its perfect niche. At the central core, where superhot water shoots upward at 30 miles per hour, thermostable bacteria anchor themselves with protein cables strong enough to resist the current. Their cells contain special heat shock proteins that prevent their internal machinery from denaturing in the extreme temperatures. Surrounding this core, like layers of an onion, different bacterial communities ring the chimney. Each layer is precisely calibrated to its environment. The bacteria at the 200-degree zone produce different enzymes than those at 300 degrees. Those in acidic water have different membrane compositions than those in neutral zones. It's a living textbook of biochemical adaptation. But this bacterial foundation supports higher levels of organization that push the boundaries of what single cells can achieve. I observe bacteria that have formed permanent partnerships, different species living so closely together they function as single organisms. Some partnerships involve 3 or even 4 different bacterial species, each contributing specialized capabilities to the collective. These bacterial consortiums achieve remarkable feats. I watch one partnership where methanotrophic bacteria consume methane and excrete organic acids, which are immediately consumed by sulfur-reducing bacteria living within the same biofilm. The sulfur bacteria produce hydrogen sulfide, which feeds a third partner that oxidizes the sulfide for energy. It's a perfectly closed loop, with waste from one organism becoming food for another. Even more remarkably, I discover bacterial communities that exhibit collective behavior resembling multicellular organization. When resources become scarce, cells throughout a bacterial mat receive chemical signals and coordinate their response. Some cells sacrifice themselves, providing nutrients for their neighbors. Others form spores and enter dormancy. Still others upregulate their metabolic machinery to extract maximum energy from dwindling resources. This coordination requires communication, a bacterial internet of chemical signals that carry information across the entire vent community. I trace these molecular messages as they flow through the bacterial mats. Quorum-sensing molecules indicate population density. Alarm pheromones warn of toxic conditions. Nutrient availability signals coordinate feeding strategies. It's a chemical language as sophisticated as any biological communication system. The implications are profound. These bacteria, isolated beneath miles of ice for millions of years, are evolving complex cooperative behaviors that blur the line between single-celled and multicellular life. They're discovering principles of organization that will eventually give rise to every plant and animal on Earth. But the bacterial communities are not alone in these deep refugia. Grazing on them are protists, eukaryotic cells that represent life's next great evolutionary leap. These cells are giants compared to bacteria, some reaching a full millimeter in length, and they move through the bacterial meadows like cattle in a field. I focus on one such protist as it hunts among the bacterial mats. Its cell membrane flows like liquid as it extends pseudopodia, false feet, to engulf bacterial cells. But this is not random feeding. The protist can distinguish between different bacterial species, selectively consuming those with the highest nutritional value, while avoiding those that produce toxins. Inside the protist cell, the consumed bacteria face a fascinating fate. Rather than being digested immediately, some are kept alive in specialized compartments called food vacuoles. The protist maintains these as living larders, feeding them nutrients to keep them healthy and productive. When the protist needs energy, it allows some bacteria to reproduce inside the vacuoles, then harvest the offspring while maintaining the breeding stock. Even more remarkably, I observe protists that have formed permanent symbioses with captured bacteria. A protist engulfs sulfur-oxidizing bacteria, but doesn't digest them. Instead, it provides them with sulfide and receives organic compounds in return. Over time, the bacteria lose the ability to live independently, becoming organelles, cellular organs, within the protist. I'm witnessing the birth of eukaryotic complexity. The mitochondria that power your cells originated in partnerships exactly like these, forged in the deep-sea refugia of the Snowball Earth. The process is happening before my eyes. Free living bacteria becoming permanent residents of eukaryotic cells, trading independence for security and specialization. The diversity of these symbioses is staggering. I find protists with methanotrophic bacteria living in their cytoplasm, providing energy from methane. Others harbor photosynthetic bacteria, creating the first crude chloroplasts capable of using the dim red light filtering through the water. Still others contain multiple bacterial partners, each providing different metabolic capabilities. These symbiotic protists achieve capabilities no single organism could manage alone. They can simultaneously harvest energy from sunlight, methane, hydrogen sulfide, and organic compounds. They can tolerate temperature swings, acid baths, and toxic metal concentrations that would kill any non-symbiotic organism. They are becoming the ancestors of all complex life. Around one particularly active vent field, I find a thriving community that extends for hundreds of yards. The base of the food chain is chemosynthetic bacteria that form thick mats on every available surface. These bacteria are incredibly efficient, extracting energy from chemical reactions between seawater and volcanic minerals. They grow in layers inches thick, creating their own topography of bacterial mountains and valleys. Grazing on these mats are various protists, single-celled eukaryotes that have evolved specialized structures for harvesting bacteria. Some extend pseudopods like amoebas, engulfing bacterial cells. Others have evolved primitive mouth-like structures that allow them to scrape bacteria from surfaces. Still others filter bacteria from the water using hair-like cilia. The grazers support their own predators, larger protists that hunt their smaller cousins. I watch one such hunter, a cell perhaps 1/100 of an inch long, stalking its prey. It moves with purpose, following chemical trails left by its target. When it catches up, it extends specialized organelles that pierce the prey cell's membrane, injecting digestive enzymes. It's a microscopic drama played out millions of times each day in the darkness. But the vents are not merely refuges for microscopic life. In the larger caverns kept liquid by volcanic heat, I discover creatures that push the boundaries of what is possible for single cells. Giant sulfur bacteria, visible to the naked eye, form pearl-like strings in the sulfide-rich water. Some protists have grown so large they can be mistaken for multicellular organisms, though they remain single cells with multiple nuclei. Most intriguingly, I observe the beginnings of true multicellularity. Cells that normally live independently are forming permanent colonies. Unlike the temporary aggregations I saw before the ice, these colonies show division of labor. Some cells specialize in feeding, others in reproduction, still others in defense against predators. It's a revolutionary development driven by the extreme selective pressure of the Snowball Earth. Life has not merely survived in these refugia. It has continued to evolve, to experiment, to push the boundaries of complexity. The Snowball Earth, far from stopping evolution, has accelerated it in unexpected directions. I spend what feels like geological ages exploring these hidden oases of life. Each one is unique, shaped by its local conditions. Some are dominated by sulfur metabolizing organisms that stain the water yellow with their waste products. Others are iron-based ecosystems, where bacteria precipitate rust-red minerals as they extract energy from dissolved iron. Still others run on methane, that simplest of organic molecules, which seeps from sediments rich in buried organic matter. In one particularly fascinating location, I discover bacteria that have evolved a remarkable survival strategy. When conditions become too harsh, when the volcanic heat falters or the chemistry changes, they form spores. These spores are marvels of biological engineering. They dehydrate their cytoplasm, compact their DNA, and surround themselves with multiple protective layers. In this state, they can survive almost anything: freezing, boiling, radiation, chemical assault. Some will remain dormant for millions of years, waiting for conditions to improve. But the most profound evolutionary development I observe is the enhancement of cellular communication. In the crowded conditions of the refugia, cells that can coordinate with their neighbors have a significant advantage. I watch as bacteria exchange chemical signals, warning each other of dangers, sharing information about food sources, even coordinating their metabolism to avoid competition. This communication extends beyond species boundaries. Different types of bacteria form partnerships, each providing something the other needs. Photosynthetic bacteria that can harvest the dim light filtering through thinner ice share sugars with chemosynthetic partners. In return, the chemosynthesizers provide nitrogen compounds that the photosynthesizers need. These partnerships are so successful that they begin to merge, different species living so closely together that they function as a single organism, I realize I am witnessing something profound: the evolution of cooperation as a survival strategy. In the harsh conditions of the Snowball Earth, organisms that work together survive better than those that compete. This principle, discovered under miles of ice, will shape all subsequent evolution on Earth. But survival in the refugia is never guaranteed. I witness numerous local extinctions as conditions change. A shift in volcanic activity can cool a hot spring below the threshold for life. A change in ocean chemistry can poison an entire community. An ice shift can crush a thriving ecosystem in seconds. Yet life as a whole persists. For every refugium that fails, others continue. For every lineage that goes extinct, others diversify to fill the gap. The tree of life is pruned severely by the Snowball Earth, but it is not killed. The branches that survive are the hardy ones, the adaptable ones, the ones that will give rise to all future life on Earth. As millions of years pass in this frozen state, I begin to notice subtle changes. The ice sheets, kilometers thick and seemingly permanent, are not actually static. They flow, imperceptibly slowly, from centers of accumulation toward the edges. This flow creates stresses and fractures, especially where the ice meets underwater obstacles like mountain ranges or volcanic islands. In these fracture zones, I discover another type of refugium. Seawater, kept liquid by pressure and volcanic heat, intrudes into cracks in the ice. These brine channels, often no wider than a human hair, create a three-dimensional network of liquid water within the solid ice. The water is extremely salty, 5, 10, even 20 times saltier than normal seawater. But life finds a way. The organisms in these brine channels are among the most extreme extremophiles on Earth. They must cope not only with freezing temperatures and high salinity, but with dramatic fluctuations in both. As the ice shifts, channels open and close. Salinity can change from merely hypersaline to salt-saturated in minutes. Temperature can swing 30 degrees as volcanic heat pulses through the system. Yet they not only survive, but thrive. Halophilic bacteria turn the brine channels pink with their pigments. Psychrophilic organisms produce antifreeze proteins that prevent ice crystals from forming in their cells. Some develop the ability to adjust their internal salt concentration in real time, matching the changing salinity of their environment. I follow one brine channel as it winds through the ice sheet for miles, connecting surface melt pools with deep ocean water. It's a highway for microbial migration, allowing genes to flow between populations that would otherwise be completely isolated. This genetic connectivity is crucial for maintaining diversity and avoiding the evolutionary dead ends that isolation can create. The surface of the Snowball Earth, while largely lifeless, is not completely sterile. In places where dark volcanic ash has fallen on the ice, the absorption of sunlight creates tiny melt pools. These cryoconite holes, as scientists of your time will call them, are miniature ecosystems. The dark ash absorbs heat, melting a small depression in the ice. Wind-blown microbes colonize these holes, growing in thin biofilms on the ash particles. Life in a cryoconite hole is precarious. Each day, if the sun shines, the hole melts a little deeper. Each night, it refreezes. The organisms must be able to survive repeated freeze-thaw cycles, dehydration, and intense UV radiation. Yet they persist, slowly growing, slowly reproducing, slowly evolving. Some cryoconite holes connect to the brine channel network below, creating pathways from surface to deep ocean. Organisms can potentially travel the entire vertical extent of the ice sheet, though the journey might take centuries. It's a three-dimensional ecosystem unlike anything that existed before or will exist after the Snowball Earth. As I explore this frozen world, I'm struck by the many ways life has found to harvest energy in the absence of sunlight. Chemosynthesis, using volcanic chemicals, is just the beginning. Some bacteria have learned to extract energy from the radioactive decay of uranium and thorium in rocks. Others use the potential difference between fresh meltwater and salty brine to generate metabolic power. Still others harvest energy from the mechanical stress of ice movement, converting pressure into chemical energy. These metabolic innovations, born of necessity in the darkness beneath the ice, will persist long after the snowball melts. They represent permanent additions to life's toolkit, new ways of making a living that will allow organisms to colonize environments previously thought uninhabitable. The Snowball Earth has become a vast laboratory for evolutionary experimentation. With most of the planet's surface area uninhabitable, life is compressed into tiny spaces where selective pressures are intense. Evolution, normally a gradual process, accelerates. New forms appear, are tested against the harsh conditions, and either persist or perish. But let me share with you the complete story of one particular refuge, a single hydrothermal vent system that I will follow through its entire 10 million year vigil beneath the ice. I call it Deep Vent Sanctuary 7, and its story illuminates how life not only survived, but flourished during the longest winter in Earth's history. The sanctuary begins its existence in the third year of the Snowball Earth, as volcanic activity 3 miles below the ice creates a crack in the ocean floor. Magma pushes upward, not quite breaching the sea floor, but heating the rock above until it glows dull red in the eternal darkness. Seawater seeps down through microscopic fractures, becomes superheated, and rises again, carrying dissolved minerals in a chemical bouquet that will nourish life for millions of years. The first colonists arrive within weeks, bacterial spores carried on deep ocean currents that still circulate beneath the ice. These hardy travelers have drifted for thousands of miles, dormant but patient, waiting for exactly these conditions. When they encounter the warm, mineral-rich water, they break dormancy and begin the work of building a community. Year 1. The bacterial pioneers are chemosynthetic sulfur oxidizers, specialists at extracting energy from hydrogen sulfide. They form thin biofilms on the heated rock surfaces, their populations doubling every 8 hours. Within months, they've created substantial mats, purple-red carpets of life in the darkness. Their metabolic waste products, sulfuric acid and elementary sulfur, begin altering the chemical environment, creating the conditions that will allow other species to follow. Year 5. The first methanotrophic bacteria arrive, carried in the gut of a migrating protist that dies shortly after reaching the vent. But the bacteria survive, finding rich methane deposits seeping from sediments. They establish their own mats, pale yellow against the red of the sulfur oxidizers. The two communities exist in careful balance, the waste heat from the sulfur bacteria providing the optimal temperature zone for methane consumption. Year 20. Iron oxidizing bacteria colonize the neutral pH zones, where the vent water has cooled and mixed with seawater. They build elaborate structures, twisted towers of precipitated iron oxides that rise like sculptures from the seafloor. These towers provide new surface area for colonization and soon harbor their own specialized communities of bacteria adapted to life on vertical surfaces. Year 50. The first protists arrive, giant amoebas that graze on the bacterial mats like microscopic cattle. Their feeding pressure forces the bacteria to evolve new defensive strategies. Some species develop toxic secretions. Others form more tightly bound mats that resist grazing. Still others evolve symbiotic relationships with the protists, trading metabolic services for protection from digestion. Year 100. A major volcanic event doubles the heat output of the vent system. Many species die, but survivors quickly evolve greater thermotolerance. New species of hyperthermophilic bacteria appear, capable of surviving in water hot enough to sterilize medical instruments. The community structure reorganizes around temperature zones, creating distinct bands of life at different distances from the heat source. Year 200. The first crude multicellular organisms appear. Colonies of bacteria that have learned to stick together and coordinate their activities. These primitive multicellular forms can achieve things no single cell could manage, building larger structures, defending more effectively against predators, exploiting resources more efficiently. They represent evolution's first experiments with the organizational principles that will eventually create plants and animals. Year 500. A crisis. The volcanic heat source shifts, moving half a mile to the east. The western part of the vent field cools rapidly, and most of its specialized community dies. But some organisms have evolved dormancy capabilities, forming spores that can survive decades of adverse conditions. These spores drift on deep currents until they reach the new vent site, where they germinate and begin rebuilding the community. Evolution has discovered the power of patience. Year 1000. The community reaches its first golden age. 3 major vent clusters support dozens of bacterial species, each occupying a precisely defined niche. Protist diversity explodes as different species specialize in consuming different bacteria. Some protists become filter feeders, straining bacteria from the water. Others become active predators, hunting their prey through the 3-dimensional maze of bacterial towers. Still others become farmers, cultivating specific bacteria in protected cavities within their cells. Year 2000. The first symbiotic partnerships stabilize into permanent relationships. A protist that originally consumed sulfur-oxidizing bacteria instead forms a partnership with them. The bacteria live within the protist cell, protected and fed, while providing energy through their metabolism. Both partners benefit. The bacteria gains security and resources, while the protist gains a reliable internal power source. It's the birth of organelles, the specialized cellular components that will power all complex life. Year 5000. Environmental fluctuations select for organisms with multiple metabolic pathways. The most successful bacteria can switch between sulfur oxidation, iron reduction, and methane consumption depending on conditions. Protists harbor multiple bacterial partners, creating internal factories capable of processing a wide range of resources. Flexibility becomes the key to survival in a variable environment. Year 10,000. A volcanic catastrophe destroys 60% of the vent system. Lava flows bury vast areas of bacterial mats, and toxic metals poison much of the remaining community. But life rebounds with astonishing resilience. Spores that survived in protected crevices germinate when conditions improve. Genetic diversity, accumulated over millennia, provides the raw material for rapid evolution. Within centuries, the community has not only recovered, but evolved new capabilities forged in the crucible of disaster. Year 25,000. The community develops the first primitive communication networks. Bacterial mats coordinate their growth using chemical signals, creating patterns of colored zones that extend for acres. Protist aggregations form in response to pheromone trails, creating temporary multicellular structures hundreds of times larger than any individual cell. Information flows through the ecosystem as efficiently as nutrients, allowing community-wide responses to environmental changes. Year 50,000. Sexual reproduction appears among the protists. Instead of simply dividing to create identical clones, some protists begin exchanging genetic material with others. This innovation accelerates evolution by creating new genetic combinations in every generation. Within millennia, the diversity of protist forms explodes. Some become highly specialized predators with sophisticated hunting mechanisms. Others develop complex life cycles with multiple stages adapted to different environmental conditions. Year 100,000. True multicellularity emerges. Protist colonies develop cellular specialization. Some cells dedicated to feeding, others to reproduction, still others to defense. These early multicellular organisms are still microscopic, but they represent a fundamental leap in organizational complexity. They can coordinate activities across hundreds of cells, achieving precision and efficiency impossible for single cells. Year 250,000. The vent system undergoes major geological changes as tectonic shifts alter the underlying magma flow. Some vents die, while others are born. The community fragments, but maintains connectivity through microbial mats that extend between active sites. Evolution discovers the power of modularity. If one part of the system fails, others can compensate. The community becomes more resilient by becoming more distributed. Year 500,000. Mineral deposition around the vents creates complex three-dimensional habitats, caverns, tunnels, and chambers that provide new ecological niches. Life colonizes these spaces, creating the first true ecosystems with multiple layers of interaction. Primary producers, the chemosynthetic bacteria, support grazers, which support predators, which support scavengers that recycle nutrients back to the primary producers. Energy flows through the system in increasingly complex patterns. Year 1,000,000. The community achieves its greatest diversity. Over 400 distinct species of bacteria occupy niches ranging from acid hot springs to alkaline cool zones. Protist diversity reaches similar levels, with forms ranging from microscopic hunters to massive filtering organisms that span multiple vent openings. Some multicellular forms grow large enough to be visible to the naked eye. The first organisms in millions of years to achieve such size. Year 2,000,000. Evolutionary arms races drive increasing sophistication. Bacterial species develop chemical warfare capabilities, producing antibiotics to kill competitors. Protists evolve resistance to these chemical weapons, while developing their own toxic secretions. The community becomes a living laboratory of biochemical innovation, creating compounds that will eventually stock the medicine cabinets of future civilizations. Year 3,000,000. Symbiotic relationships reach extraordinary complexity. I observe protists harboring 5 different bacterial partners, each providing specialized capabilities. One bacterial partner provides energy through sulfur oxidation, another through methane consumption, a third through iron reduction. A fourth partner produces essential nutrients, while a fifth serves as a defensive system, secreting toxins to deter predators. The protist has become a living ecosystem in miniature. Year 4,000,000. The community survives its greatest crisis since the original volcanic catastrophe. Tectonic activity nearly shuts down the entire vent system, reducing the habitable area by 90%. Most species go extinct, but the genetic diversity accumulated over millions of years proves its worth. The survivors carried the legacy of all the extinct forms in their DNA, and as the vents slowly recover, Evolution rebuilds the community from this genetic treasure trove. Year 5 million. New forms of reproduction appear. Some multicellular organisms develop the ability to reproduce both sexually and asexually, switching strategies depending on environmental conditions. When times are stable, they reproduce asexually, preserving successful genetic combinations. When conditions become stressful, they switch to sexual reproduction, generating genetic diversity that might include combinations better suited to new challenges. Year 6 million. Behavioral sophistication emerges among the larger multicellular forms. They exhibit primitive forms of learning, altering their feeding patterns based on experience. Some forms develop seasonal cycles, changing their physiology in response to the rhythmic changes in volcanic activity. Others form aggregations that persist across multiple generations, creating the first crude societies in Earth's biosphere. Year 7 million. The community begins producing complex organic molecules that serve no immediate metabolic purpose, but store genetic information in new ways. These are the first primitive nucleic acids more sophisticated than the simple DNA and RNA of individual cells. They carry information about community organization, environmental history, and evolutionary innovations. The ecosystem develops a chemical memory that extends beyond individual organisms. Year 8 million. Specialization reaches unprecedented levels. Some bacterial species become so adapted to specific conditions that they can survive in only a few cubic yards of habitat. Yet this extreme specialization is balanced by evolved interdependence. No species can survive alone. The community has become a single superorganism, with each species functioning like an organ in a vast body. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Year 9 million. Signs of aging appear in the vent system as the underlying geological processes gradually weaken. Heat output declines, and mineral flows become less reliable. But the community has evolved redundancy and efficiency that allows it to thrive on declining resources. Organisms become more efficient at extracting energy from marginal conditions. Recycling becomes so complete that almost no nutrients are lost from the system. Year 10 million. As the Snowball Earth begins its transition toward the Great Thaw, the community of Deep Vent Sanctuary 7 reaches the culmination of its evolutionary journey. It has become a complex ecosystem containing thousands of species, many of which exist nowhere else on Earth. The genetic innovations developed here, multicellularity, symbiosis, sexual reproduction, behavioral flexibility, represent the toolkit that life will use to explode into diversity when the ice finally melts. The sanctuary has served as evolution's research and development laboratory, a place where life could experiment with new forms and capabilities, while the rest of the planet remained frozen. Every major innovation that will characterize complex life has been tested and refined in this deep refuge. The community has not merely survived 10 million years of ice. It has used that time to prepare for the biological renaissance that will follow. As I prepare to witness the sanctuary's final chapter, I'm struck by the profound lesson it teaches. Isolation and adversity, rather than stopping evolution, have accelerated it. The constraints of the vent environment have forced life to become more efficient, more cooperative, more innovative. The community that emerges from this crucible is not just more diverse than what went in. It's more capable, more resilient, more ready to seize the opportunities that will come with the return of surface conditions. Deep Vent Sanctuary 7 stands as a monument to life's creativity under pressure. Its 10 million year story demonstrates that crisis and opportunity are often the same event, viewed from different perspectives. The greatest challenges can become the greatest catalysts for growth if organisms, and perhaps humans, have the patience and persistence to see them through. I observe one particularly striking example of rapid evolution in a hot spring that periodically cools below the threshold for its normal inhabitants. When the spring is hot, thermophilic bacteria dominate. But as it cools, these bacteria die off, and psychrophilic organisms take over. The transition happens repeatedly, and I watch as some bacteria evolve the ability to survive both temperature regimes. These temperature-tolerant bacteria achieve their flexibility through a remarkable mechanism. They produce two sets of enzymes, one optimized for high temperatures, another for low. They can switch between these sets in response to temperature changes, like changing clothes for different weather. It's a metabolic innovation that requires significant genetic investment, but provides enormous survival advantage. The evolution of such flexibility is a recurring theme in Snowball Earth refugia. Organisms that can adapt to changing conditions survive better than specialists. I see this in salinity tolerance, pH tolerance, pressure tolerance. The survivors of the Snowball Earth are the generalists, the adaptable ones, the organisms that can roll with whatever punches the environment throws. This adaptability extends to dormancy strategies. Many organisms evolve the ability to shut down their metabolism almost completely when conditions deteriorate. They're not dead, but they're not quite alive either. They exist in a state of suspended animation that can last years, decades, even centuries. When conditions improve, they spring back to life as if no time had passed. I observe cells that have been dormant for so long that the radioactive isotopes in their DNA have measurably decayed. Yet when the right conditions return, they repair the damage and resume growth. It's a testament to the resilience of life's information storage and repair mechanisms. But perhaps the most profound development I witness is the evolution of biological clocks. In the permanent darkness beneath the ice, the daily and seasonal cycles that regulate life on the surface are absent. Yet organisms still need to coordinate their activities. They evolve internal timekeepers, molecular clocks that tick independently of external cues. These biological clocks, refined in the timeless darkness of the Snowball Earth, will persist through all subsequent evolution. The circadian rhythms that regulate your sleep-wake cycle are direct descendants of these ancient timekeepers. Even in the absence of day and night, life maintains its own rhythm. 10 million years pass. 15 million. The ice shows no sign of retreating. From space, Earth remains a white ball, reflecting 90% of the sun's energy back into space. It seems like a stable state, a frozen equilibrium that could last forever. But deep beneath the ice, in the hot darkness of volcanic vents, in the hypersaline brine channels, in the marginal melt pools and cryoconite holes, life is not merely surviving, it is preparing, unconsciously but inexorably, for the world that will come after the ice. The evolutionary innovations forged in these refugia, multicellularity, symbiosis, metabolic flexibility, biological clocks, will explode into the post-Snowball world and reshape the biosphere forever. The Snowball Earth is not an end, but a beginning. Not a disaster, but a forge. In the deepest freeze our planet has ever known, life is laying the groundwork for the biological revolutions to come. Before we witness the great thaw, let me guide you into deeper contemplation of what this cosmic winter means for you. Here in your warm room, in your brief moment of consciousness in the universe's long story. For the Snowball Earth speaks not just of ancient bacteria and primitive cells. but of something fundamental about existence itself, about persistence in the face of impossible odds, about finding light in the deepest darkness, about the strange alchemy by which suffering becomes strength. Rest more deeply into your pillow. Let your breathing slow, and feel yourself not just as an observer of this ancient story, but as its inheritor, its living consequence. Every cell in your body carries molecular machinery refined in those dark refugia beneath the ice. Your capacity for resilience, for adaptation, for cooperation in the face of adversity. These are gifts from organisms that refuse to surrender when the world itself seemed to surrender. Consider the remarkable fact of your existence. You are here, conscious and breathing, because billions of years ago, microscopic cells chose persistence over extinction. In the face of a planet-wide catastrophe that should have ended life forever, they found ways to continue. They huddled in tiny warm spaces. They learned to share resources. They developed patience that spanned geological ages. They transformed crisis into opportunity, constraint into creativity. This is not merely ancient history. It is the deepest story of who you are. When you face your own winters, those dark periods when everything seems frozen, when progress seems impossible, when the warmth of hope feels impossibly distant, remember that you carry within you the legacy of organisms that survived the ultimate winter. Their endurance lives in your DNA. Their creativity flows in your neurons. Their refusal to surrender beats in your heart. The Snowball Earth teaches us that what appears to be ending may actually be transformation. Those ancient bacteria didn't know they were pioneering the evolutionary innovations that would eventually create consciousness. They were simply doing what life does, adapting, persisting, finding ways to continue. But their patient work in the darkness laid the foundation for everything that followed, for the explosion of complex life, for the emergence of awareness, for the capacity to contemplate the stars. In your own life, you may find yourself in seasons that feel like your personal Snowball Earth, times when the circumstances that once supported your growth seem to have vanished, when the resources you depended on are no longer available, when the familiar patterns of your life have frozen solid, and you cannot see how anything will ever change again. But consider the wisdom hidden in those hydrothermal vents. Life survived not by maintaining the status quo, but by discovering new ways of being. The bacteria that thrived in the vent communities weren't the same as those that had lived in the warm surface oceans. They were transformed versions, equipped with new capabilities, new forms of metabolism, new strategies for cooperation. They found energy sources they had never used before. They formed partnerships that had never existed before. They became more than they had been. This is the deeper teaching of the Snowball Earth, that crisis is not the opposite of growth, but often its most powerful catalyst. When the old ways of living become impossible, life doesn't simply endure, it evolves. It discovers capabilities it never knew it possessed. It finds resources in places it never thought to look. It forms alliances that seemed impossible when times were easier. The creatures that emerged from those refugia were not merely survivors. They were pioneers. They carried genetic innovations and metabolic strategies that allowed life to explore new frontiers when the ice finally melted. The symbiotic partnerships forged under extreme pressure became the cellular organelles that power every complex organism. The cooperative behaviors learned in crowded refugia became the foundation for multicellular life and ultimately for consciousness itself. You too are both survivor and pioneer. The challenges you face are not just obstacles to endure. but opportunities to discover new dimensions of your own capability. The constraints that seem to limit you may actually be forcing you to develop new strengths, new perspectives, new ways of connecting with others. What feels like your personal ice age may be preparing you for growth that would be impossible under easier conditions. Think of the profound patience demonstrated by those ancient organisms. Spores that remain dormant for centuries, waiting for conditions to improve. Bacterial communities that sustain themselves in spaces smaller than your fingernail for millions of years, maintaining their diversity and complexity through sheer persistence. They remind us that meaningful change often requires not the frantic activity we associate with progress, but the deep patience that can sustain hope through long winters. In your fast-paced world, where change is expected to be instant and results immediate, the Snowball Earth offers a different wisdom. It suggests that the most profound transformations may require time measured not in days or months, but in seasons or years or even decades. That the most important work may happen in darkness, invisible to outside observation, as internal structures reorganize and new capabilities develop. The refugia teach us about the power of small spaces, tiny havens where life persists when the larger world becomes uninhabitable. In your own life, these refugia might be moments of meditation that sustain you through chaotic days. Friendships that provide warmth when the social climate grows cold. Creative practices that keep your inner life alive when outer circumstances drain your energy. Small rituals of meaning that connect you to something larger than your immediate struggles. These refugia are not escapes from difficulty, but laboratories where you develop the capabilities you'll need when conditions improve. Just as the vent communities were testing grounds for evolutionary innovations, your small spaces of refuge become testing grounds for new ways of being human, new forms of resilience, new capacities for connection, new resources of creativity and hope. The Snowball Earth also reveals the surprising ways that limitation can unlock possibility. When the surface ocean became uninhabitable, life discovered the deep sea. When photosynthesis became impossible, chemosynthesis flourished. When individual survival strategies failed, cooperative partnerships emerged. The most severe constraints forced life to explore dimensions of existence it might never have discovered under easier conditions, your own constraints, the circumstances that seem to block your path, the resources you lack, the opportunities that seem closed to you, may actually be directing you toward possibilities you haven't yet imagined. Like those ancient organisms learning to extract energy from chemical bonds instead of sunlight, you may discover that what seems like limitation is actually redirection toward new sources of vitality and growth. But perhaps the most profound teaching of the Snowball Earth concerns the relationship between individual survival and collective flourishing. In the refugia, the organisms that thrived were not those that hoarded resources or competed most fiercely, but those that learned to share, to cooperate, to form mutually beneficial partnerships. The strongest survivors became the foundation for everyone else's success. This wisdom reaches across billions of years to speak to your current moment. In times of scarcity and uncertainty, the human tendency often turns toward competition, toward protecting what we have from others who might need it. But the ancient refugia suggest a different strategy, that our own survival is intimately connected to the survival of our communities, that the innovations we develop to meet our own challenges become resources for everyone's benefit, that the partnerships we form in difficult times become the foundation for collective flourishing when conditions improve. The symbiotic relationships that evolved in the vent communities were not temporary alliances of convenience, but permanent transformations that created new forms of life. Similarly, the connections you formed during your challenging times, the ways you learn to support others even when you yourself need support, the strategies you develop to share resources even when resources are scarce. These become permanent additions to your character, new capabilities that persist long after the immediate crisis passes. And like those ancient organisms, you may not be able to see the full significance of your persistence while you're in the midst of it. The bacteria in the refugia had no knowledge that they were laying the groundwork for the Cambrian explosion, for the development of complex ecosystems, for the eventual emergence of consciousness. They were simply doing what was necessary to continue, moment by moment, day by day, millennium by millennium. Your own persistence through difficult times may be seeding possibilities you cannot yet imagine. The patience you develop while waiting for change may become wisdom that guides you through future challenges. The creativity you discover while working with limited resources may open new pathways of growth. The compassion you learn while sharing scarce resources may become the foundation for forms of community you haven't yet envisioned. The Snowball Earth lasted 20 million years, but it was not 20 million years of static endurance. It was 20 million years of subtle, continuous adaptation and innovation. Change was happening constantly, even if it wasn't visible from the surface. Below the ice, in the darkness, life was reinventing itself, preparing for a future it could not yet see, but somehow sensed was coming. Your own difficult seasons may feel like periods of stagnation, but they are more likely periods of invisible growth. Like seeds germinating underground through a long winter, essential developments are occurring beneath the surface of your awareness. Your psyche is developing new structures. Your spirit is exploring new resources. Your capacity for wisdom and compassion is deepening through the pressure of circumstances, like carbon becoming diamond under the weight of the earth. And just as a Snowball Earth ended not gradually, but in a spectacular transformation, ice sheets melting in decades rather than millennia, new life forms exploding into countless varieties. Your own emergence from difficult times may be more dramatic than you expect. The capabilities you develop during the long winter may express themselves suddenly and powerfully when conditions shift. The partnerships you forge in small refugia may become the foundation for expansive new forms of collaboration and community. So rest now in the knowledge that you are part of an unbroken chain of persistence that reaches back to the deepest ice age our planet has ever known. Your capacity for endurance is not just personal will, but the inheritance of billions of years of life refusing to surrender. Your creativity in the face of constraints is not just individual ingenuity, but the expression of life's fundamental tendency to find new ways forward when old ways are blocked. Your willingness to form connections and share resources, even when you yourself are struggling, participates in the same cooperative spirit that allowed life to not just survive, but flourish in Earth's darkest hours. You are both heir to that ancient persistence and contributor to its ongoing expression in the world. The ice always melts eventually. Spring always comes. Life always finds a way forward. These are not just metaphors or hopeful platitudes, but statements of geological fact, biological reality, the deepest truths written in stone and ice and DNA. They are your birthright and your responsibility to carry the flame of consciousness forward, whatever the weather, whatever the season, however long the winter may last. Breathe that truth deeply into your body. Feel it settling into your bones, your bloodstream, the quiet spaces between your thoughts. You are not separate from the story of life's resilience. You are its latest chapter, its current expression, its living frontier. What happened in those ancient refugia is still happening in you. Adaptation, innovation, partnership, patient persistence through whatever comes. The winter that forged your deepest ancestors was also forging you. The spring that eventually came to them is also coming to you. Trust in the timing that operates on scales larger than human urgency. Rest in the persistence that flows deeper than personal will. Find hope not just in your own strength, but in the vast collaborative project of existence that has been finding ways forward for billions of years, and of which you are an essential part. 20 million years have passed since the oceans froze. The Snowball Earth has settled into what seems like a permanent state. A white planet reflecting the sun's warmth back to space, its surface locked in ice miles thick. Life reduced to scattered refugia around volcanic vents and in brine channels. From orbit, there is no sign that this frozen state will ever end. But changes are occurring that will eventually shatter this icy equilibrium. Deep beneath the frozen surface, the Earth's interior continues its patient work. Mantle plumes rise from the core mantle boundary, carrying heat from the planet's formation and from the decay of radioactive elements. Where these plumes reach the surface, volcanoes punch through the ice, creating islands of black rock in the white wilderness. I position myself above one such volcano, watching it erupt through 3 miles of glacial ice. The sight is spectacular beyond description. Lava at 2000 degrees Fahrenheit meets ice at -60, creating explosion after explosion. Steam blasts thousands of feet into the air, freezing instantly into ice crystals that fall like glittering snow. The lava quickly crusts over, but more pushes from below, building a cone that rises above the ice surface. But it's not the lava itself that matters. It's the gases. Each eruption releases carbon dioxide, water vapor, sulfur dioxide, methane. In normal times, these gases would be absorbed by the oceans, incorporated into rocks, or consumed by photosynthetic organisms. But the oceans are sealed beneath ice. The rocks are frozen. Photosynthesis has all but ceased. The gases have nowhere to go but up, accumulating in the atmosphere. I watch as slowly, imperceptibly, the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide begins to rise. At the start of the snowball, it was perhaps 200 parts per million. After 20 million years of volcanic emissions, it has risen to 1,000 parts per million, then 2,000, then 5,000. The atmosphere is becoming a greenhouse, trapping heat that would otherwise escape to space. But the ice surface continues to reflect most of the sun's energy, preventing warming. It's a standoff between the reflective power of ice and the heat-trapping power of greenhouse gases. For millions of years, the ice wins. But the balance is shifting. I measure the temperature at various points on the planet. The poles remain brutally cold. But at the equator, something is changing. Where once the noon temperature was -10 degrees Fahrenheit, now it's -5, then 0. Still below freezing, but approaching the critical threshold. The first sign of change is subtle. On the equatorial ice surface, where volcanic ash has created dark patches, I notice tiny pools of liquid water forming during the warmest part of the day. They refreeze each night, but their very existence is revolutionary. Liquid water on the surface of Earth. It hasn't been seen for 20 million years. These temporary melt pools become more frequent, larger, longer lasting. The water is dark, absorbing far more sunlight than the surrounding ice. Each pool creates a microclimate slightly warmer than its surroundings, encouraging more melting. It's the beginning of a new feedback loop, this time working against the ice. I observe one particular melt pool through an entire season. It begins as a tiny depression where volcanic ash has accumulated. The dark ash absorbs sunlight, warming to several degrees above the surrounding ice. Meltwater collects in the depression, creating a pool perhaps a foot across. But liquid water is denser than ice. The pool begins to drill downward, melting its way deeper into the ice sheet. As it deepens, it captures more sunlight, like a lens focusing energy. The sides remain frozen, creating a vertical shaft filled with liquid water, a well reaching down into the ice. Wind-blown microbes colonize this pool within days. They've been dormant on the ice surface, waiting for just such an opportunity. Now they bloom, turning the water green with photosynthesis. For the first time in millions of years, oxygen is being produced at the Earth's surface. The pool survives through the summer, freezing only partially during the cooler nights. But as winter approaches and the sun's angle decreases, it finally freezes solid. The microbes form cysts or spores. Returning to dormancy, the pool appears dead. But the following summer, it melts again, deeper than before. The microbial community revives, more diverse now, as different species have arrived on the wind. Some produce dark pigments that help the pool absorb even more heat. Others secrete antifreeze compounds that lower the freezing point of the water. Year by year, the pool deepens. 10 feet, 20, 50. It's becoming a significant feature, visible from high altitude as a dark spot on the white ice. And it's not alone. Across the equatorial regions, thousands of similar pools are forming, each one a tiny dagger thrust into the heart of the snowball. Meanwhile, the atmospheric carbon dioxide continues to rise. 10,000 parts per million, 20,000, 50,000. The atmosphere is now 25% carbon dioxide, creating a greenhouse effect more powerful than anything in Earth's previous history. The air pressure has increased noticeably as volcanic gases thicken the atmosphere. Yet still, the ice persists. The albedo effect is so strong that even this tremendous greenhouse struggles to overcome it. The planet seems locked in a frozen state that no amount of warming can break. But then, on a day that begins like any other in this eternal winter, something unprecedented happens. In the tropical ocean, where the ice is thinnest and the greenhouse warming strongest, a melt pool penetrates all the way through the sea ice. I'm there when it happens, watching from below as the drill hole of meltwater finally breaches the bottom of the ice sheet. Let me shift perspectives to witness this cosmic turning point from multiple scales simultaneously. From the quantum interactions of individual molecules to the planetary dynamics that will reshape the world. At the molecular level, the breakthrough happens in an instant of thermal chaos. Water molecules at the ice-ocean interface, vibrating with increasing energy from the greenhouse warming above, suddenly have enough kinetic energy to break free from their crystalline bonds. The hydrogen bonds that have held the ice structure intact for 20 million years snap like microscopic chains, releasing water molecules into chaotic liquid motion. The rupture propagates through the ice crystal lattice at the speed of sound, 4,000 feet per second through solid ice. Cracks spread outward from the initial breakthrough point like lightning frozen in ice, following the natural planes of weakness in the crystal structure. What began as the failure of a few molecular bonds becomes a cascading collapse of crystalline architecture. From the cellular perspective, the breakthrough is both catastrophe and liberation. Bacterial cells trapped in the brine channels of the ice suddenly find themselves in open water. Their metabolic machinery, slowed to a crawl by 20 million years of near-freezing temperatures, begins to accelerate as thermal energy floods the system. Enzymes that have been barely active start functioning at normal rates. Membrane transport systems that have been nearly dormant begin moving nutrients and waste products with desperate efficiency. For the eukaryotic cells in the deep refugia, the breakthrough triggers an explosion of activity. Chemical signals flood through the water, oxygen levels rising, carbon dioxide concentration shifting, pH changes that haven't occurred since the ice formed. These chemical changes activate genetic programs that have been dormant for geological ages. Genes for rapid reproduction, for competitive growth, for environmental exploration, all begin expressing proteins at maximum rates. At the ecosystem level, the breakthrough creates a pressure wave of change that ripples through every refugium beneath the ice. The first whiff of surface water carries chemical signals that haven't been present in the deep ocean for 20 million years. Nitrogen compounds from atmospheric breakdown, organic molecules from the decomposition of ice-trapped organisms, isotope ratios that speak of atmospheric processes long suspended. These chemical messengers trigger responses throughout the deep ecosystem. Bacterial mats that have remained stable for millions of years suddenly begin reorganizing. Symbiotic partnerships that have been successful in the closed refugia face new competitive pressures as opportunities for independent existence return. Dormant spores that have waited eons for this moment begin the complex process of germination. From the atmospheric perspective, the breakthrough is equally dramatic. The first water vapor to evaporate from open ocean in 20 million years carries with it the chemical signatures of a transformed world. The isotope ratios tell stories of long separation between ocean and atmosphere. The dissolved gases speak of metabolic processes that have continued in isolation. The trace organic compounds reveal the existence of ecosystems that have evolved in complete darkness. This atmospheric chemistry triggers responses in the supercharged greenhouse above. Water vapor, the most powerful greenhouse gas, begins amplifying the warming effect of the accumulated carbon dioxide. Cloud formation begins for the first time in millions of years, but these are not normal clouds. They are supersaturated with chemical compounds from the deep ocean, creating precipitation that will reshape the land surface with unprecedented speed. At the geological scale, the breakthrough creates stresses that propagate through the entire ice sheet. The whole acts as a pressure release valve, allowing the weight of 3 miles of ice to redistribute itself in new patterns. Fractures that have been stable for millions of years suddenly become active. Ice streams that have been frozen solid begin to flow. The gravitational field of the planet itself shifts subtly as massive amounts of ice rearrange themselves. From the planetary perspective, the breakthrough marks the beginning of a phase transition unlike any in Earth's history. The albedo, the fraction of sunlight reflected back to space, begins to shift as dark water replaces white ice. This change in energy balance alters atmospheric circulation patterns that have been stable for 20 million years. Temperature gradients that have remained constant since the beginning of the snowball begin to fluctuate wildly. Even from the cosmic perspective, the breakthrough is significant. Earth's infrared signature, as seen from space, begins to change as the planet's surface emits more heat and absorbs more solar radiation. The planet's rotational dynamics shift subtly as massive ice sheets begin to destabilize, changing the distribution of mass across the surface. Tidal forces from the sun and moon interact differently with a partially liquid ocean than with a completely solid surface. Yet this cosmic moment of transformation began with the failure of a single hydrogen bond. a quantum-scale event involving the electromagnetic interaction between one hydrogen atom and one oxygen atom. The cascade from quantum to cosmic illustrates the profound interconnectedness of all scales of existence. The smallest events can have global consequences when they occur at the right place and time in a system poised for transformation. I'm there when it happens, watching from below as the drill hole of meltwater finally breaches the bottom of the ice sheet. Suddenly, after 20 million years of separation, ocean and atmosphere are connected. The hole is small, just a few feet across, but its significance is enormous. Dark ocean water, rich with dissolved iron and other minerals from millions of years of underwater volcanism, wells up through the hole. It's much warmer than the ice, a balmy 35 degrees Fahrenheit. It begins melting the ice from below even as the sun melts it from above. The hole widens rapidly. Within hours, it's 10 feet across. Within days, 100 feet. The dark water absorbs sunlight voraciously, warming quickly under the tropical sun. By the end of the week, there's an open pool of ocean water half a mile across. This is the tipping point. The albedo feedback that created the snowball now works in reverse. Less ice means more heat absorption, means less ice. The process accelerates exponentially, but the melt is not gentle. The atmosphere, supercharged with greenhouse gases, creates a hothouse effect as soon as the ice begins to retreat. Temperatures don't rise gradually, they skyrocket. At the edge of the melting ice, temperatures jump from below freezing to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit in a matter of days. The thermal shock shatters the ice sheet. Cracks propagate for hundreds of miles, splitting the seemingly solid ice into countless fragments. Icebergs the size of small continents break free and drift toward the equator. The sound is apocalyptic. The crack of breaking ice echoes around the globe like the planet itself is screaming. From space, the transformation is stunning. The perfect white ball of the snowball Earth develops dark patches that spread like an infection. Within a year, the tropical oceans are largely ice-free. Within a decade, the ice has retreated to the mid-latitudes. The albedo feedback is now in full reverse, accelerating the melt beyond any natural precedent. The sheer volume of melting ice creates its own weather. As trillion tons of ice convert to water vapor, the long, dry atmosphere becomes saturated with moisture. Clouds form for the first time in 20 million years. Not the gentle clouds of normal Earth, but towering thunderheads that reach to the limits of the atmosphere. And then the rains begin. These are not ordinary rains. The atmosphere contains 50,000 parts per million carbon dioxide, making every raindrop acidic. The pH of the rainfall is closer to vinegar than to modern rain. It attacks the newly exposed rocks with chemical fury, dissolving minerals that have been locked in ice for millions of years. I position myself on a newly exposed continental surface to witness this chemical assault. The rocks are scoured clean by glacial action, presenting fresh surfaces to the acid rain. As the rain falls, you can actually see the rock dissolving, streams running milky with dissolved minerals. In hours, the rain carves channels that would normally take centuries to form. The weathering pulls carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at a fantastic rate. The dissolved minerals flow to the ocean, where they precipitate as carbonate rocks, locking the carbon away. It's the planet's natural thermostat finally kicking in, working to bring the greenhouse gases back under control. But the process is violent. The rain falls in sheets so thick you cannot see through them. It falls continuously for days, weeks, months. The newly exposed land, barren of plants to hold the soil, erodes catastrophically. Mudslides carry billions of tons of sediment to the ocean, turning coastal waters opaque. The oceans themselves are in chaos. The meltwater is fresh, creating a lens of low-density water floating on the denser salt water below. This stratification prevents normal ocean circulation. The deep waters, cut off from the atmosphere for 20 million years, are anoxic and loaded with dissolved iron and other metals from submarine volcanism. When storms mix these deep waters to the surface, the iron reacts with oxygen in spectacular fashion. The ocean turns red with rust, like blood in water. These iron formations precipitate and sink, creating banded iron formations on the seafloor that geologists of your time will puzzle over. The temperature swings are extreme. Some equatorial areas see temperatures rise to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to sterilize exposed surfaces. Then a storm system moves through, dropping temperatures 50 degrees in an hour. The thermal stress shatters rocks, accelerating erosion even further. Life, hidden for so long in its refugia, faces a new crisis. The hot springs that provided sanctuary are suddenly submerged as sea levels rise 3,000 feet. The hypersaline brine channels dilute and disappear. The stable, if harsh, conditions of the Snowball are replaced by chaotic change. Yet life rises to the challenge. The organisms that survive the Snowball are tough, adaptable, ready for anything. As the ice retreats, they explode out of their refugia into a world empty of competition. I watch as photosynthetic bacteria, dormant for millions of years, bloom in the newly opened oceans. The water turns green, then red, then brown, as different species compete for dominance. Oxygen production, nearly zero during the Snowball, ramps up exponentially. Within decades, oxygen levels in the surface ocean approach modern values. The eukaryotes, those complex cells that barely survived in hot spring refugia, find themselves in paradise. Warm, sunlit waters rich in nutrients provide everything they need. They diversify rapidly, exploring new forms and new lifestyles. Some remain single-celled but grow to enormous size. Others experiment with colonial living, cells sticking together for mutual benefit. Most significantly, I observe the emergence of true multicellularity. Not just cells sticking together, but cells differentiating, specializing, taking on different roles within a single organism. These early multicellular creatures are simple, just balls or sheets of cells, but they represent a revolution in the organization of life. The post-Snowball ocean is an evolutionary free-for-all. With most ecological niches empty, there's room for experimentation. I see organisms trying every possible body plan, every feeding strategy, every mode of reproduction. Most fail, but those that succeed radiate into multiple species within generations. On land, the changes are equally dramatic. The glaciers have scraped the continents down to bedrock, but the rock is rich in nutrients from volcanic ash and fresh exposure. As the rains moderate and the temperatures stabilize, primitive organisms begin colonizing the barren surfaces. First come the cyanobacteria, forming thin biofilms on wet rocks. They're followed by primitive fungi, their thread-like hyphae penetrating microscopic cracks in the stone. Together, bacteria and fungi begin the slow process of creating soil, breaking down rock into smaller particles, adding organic matter as they live and die. The landscape is alien, bare rock stretching to the horizon, cut by rivers running red with dissolved iron, under a sky still hazy with volcanic gases. But it's a landscape pregnant with possibility. In a geological eye blink, it will be green with primitive plants. But for now, it's a blank canvas waiting for life to paint its story. As I surveyed this transformed world, I'm struck by how different it is from the pre-Snowball Earth. The Snowball was not just an interruption in Earth's history. It was a reset, a second beginning. The life that emerges is more complex, more diverse, more innovative than what came before. The stage is set for the next act in Earth's drama. The Ediacaran fauna will soon appear, followed by the Cambrian explosion. Animals, plants, and fungi will diversify beyond imagination. But all of this is built on the foundation laid during and after the Snowball Earth. The planet has passed through ice and fire and emerged transformed. It will never be the same again. But before we conclude our journey, let me reveal something remarkable about the story we've just witnessed. What I've shown you as the Snowball Earth was not a single event, but the latest in a series of global glaciations that tested life's resilience repeatedly throughout Earth's deep history. The planet froze completely at least twice, and perhaps 4 times, during the Neoproterozoic era. Each glaciation was a distinct catastrophe with its own character, its own duration, its own evolutionary consequences. The story begins 720 million years ago with what your scientists call the Sturtian glaciation, named after the Sturt Gorge in South Australia, where the evidence was first recognized. This was the longest and most severe of all the Snowball events, lasting perhaps 60 million years, long enough for entire mountain ranges to be carved away by ice, for continents to drift thousands of miles across the frozen globe. I drift backward through time to witness this first great freezing. The trigger is different from the later glaciation we experienced together. The supercontinent Rodinia is just beginning its breakup, but the process is more violent, more volcanically active. Massive basaltic eruptions in what will become eastern Canada pour sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, creating a global cooling effect that persists for millennia. The sulfur compounds reflect sunlight back to space, while simultaneously accelerating the weathering of rock surfaces, pulling carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at an accelerated rate. The Sturtian ice is thicker, more permanent than what we witnessed in the later glaciation. In some places, the ice sheets reach depths of 6 miles. Their weight so immense that they crack the Earth's crust and trigger earthquakes that can be felt thousands of miles away. The ice persists longer at low latitudes, creating a planet so white and reflective that it can barely absorb enough solar energy to maintain even the volcanic refugia. Life's response to the Sturtian glaciation is more desperate, more experimental than during the later Marinoan event we witnessed together. This is evolution's first encounter with global freeze, and the solutions are crude, inefficient, barely adequate. Many entire lineages disappear forever, their genetic innovations lost to the ice. But those that survive do so through strategies so radical, they seem like different forms of life entirely. I observe bacterial communities in Sturtian refugia that have abandoned individual existence almost completely. They form superorganisms, colonial entities with millions of cells functioning as single units. Some of these bacterial collectives achieve primitive forms of consciousness. Not thought as we understand it, but collective decision-making that allows them to respond to environmental changes as unified entities. It's an evolutionary experiment that will largely be abandoned as conditions improve, but it demonstrates the extremes to which life will go to persist. When the Sturtian ice finally melts, it does so in a chemical catastrophe even more violent than the later Marinoan thaw. The atmosphere contains carbon dioxide concentrations approaching 100,000 parts per million, 30% carbon dioxide, creating greenhouse conditions so extreme that the polar regions reach temperatures of 140 degrees Fahrenheit. The thermal shock kills most surface life immediately, but it also creates the chemical conditions for an evolutionary explosion. The post-Sturtian world is alien beyond description. The massive weathering and erosion of the glacial period has dissolved so much rock that the oceans are supersaturated with dissolved minerals. When the ice melts and biological productivity resumes, these minerals precipitate in vast quantities, creating formations of pure limestone and iron ore hundreds of feet thick. The seafloor becomes a moonscape of crystalline deposits and metallic formations. But life adapts to this mineral-rich environment with remarkable creativity. The first organisms to evolve shells and skeletons appear in the post-Sturtian seas, taking advantage of the abundant calcium and silica to construct protective and supportive structures. These early experiments in biomineralization are crude, simple tubes and spirals, but they represent the first steps toward the complex shells and bones that will characterize later life. The genetic innovations of the Sturtian survivors spread through the ecosystem with unprecedented speed. Sexual reproduction, still rare before the glaciation, becomes the dominant form of reproduction among complex organisms. This acceleration of genetic exchange allows rapid adaptation to the chaotic post-glacial environment, and within 10 million years, the diversity of life exceeds pre-glacial levels. But the planet's ice age is far from over. 650 million years ago. Just as life begins to recover its full complexity from the Sturtian disaster, a second global glaciation begins. This is the Marinoan snowball we witnessed together. Shorter than the Sturtian, but in some ways more severe because it strikes a more complex biosphere. The Marinoan glaciation has a different character than its predecessor. Rather than being triggered by volcanism, it results from the peculiar geography created by Rodinia's ongoing breakup. The fragments of the supercontinent are arranged in a configuration that disrupts ocean circulation patterns and accelerates carbon dioxide removal through weathering. The freeze happens faster, within just a few thousand years, rather than the gradual cooling that preceded the Sturtian event. This rapid onset catches life unprepared. The organisms that survived the Sturtian glaciation have evolved sophisticated adaptations to cold and scarcity, but they're optimized for gradual change. The Marinoan freeze happens too quickly for most organisms to migrate to refugia or enter dormancy. The extinction rate is higher, the genetic bottleneck more severe, yet the survivors are tougher, more adaptable than their Sturtian predecessors. The refugia communities we observed, with their sophisticated symbioses, their metabolic flexibility, their cooperative behaviors, represent the culmination of nearly 70 million years of evolutionary refinement under extreme conditions. They're not just surviving in the refugia, they're thriving, innovating, preparing for the biological revolution that will follow. The Marinoan ice begins to melt 635 million years ago in the catastrophic thaw we witnessed. But what follows is different from the post-Sturtian recovery. The organisms that emerge from this second global winter are not just survivors, but pioneers, equipped with genetic toolkits sophisticated enough to exploit every available ecological niche. Within just 20 million years of the Marinoan thaw, the first large complex multicellular organisms appear. The enigmatic Ediacaran fauna. These creatures, unlike anything that has existed before or will exist again, represent evolution's first experiments with macroscopic body plans. They're possible only because the snowball survivors have perfected the cellular machinery of multicellularity. the metabolic strategies for supporting large bodies, the symbiotic partnerships that allow different cell types to cooperate. But the story grows more complex still. Evidence suggests there may have been additional snowball events. A brief glaciation called the Kaigas, around 700 million years ago, and possibly another called the Gaskias, just 580 million years ago. Each would have tested life's resilience in different ways, selected for different adaptations, contributed different innovations to the genetic toolkit. The recognition of these multiple glaciations is itself a remarkable story of scientific detective work. When geologists of your era first found evidence of ancient ice sheets in tropical regions, it seemed impossible. How could there be glacial deposits in rocks formed at the equator? How could ice have existed where palm trees grow today? The evidence was subtle, requiring careful reading of stone layers laid down 700 million years ago. Dropstones, rocks carried by icebergs and dropped into deep ocean sediments, found thousands of miles from any possible source of ice, tillites, jumbled rock formations characteristic of glacial moraines, discovered in formations that magnetic analysis showed formed near the equator, striations, scratches carved by glacial ice, oriented in directions that could only make sense if ice had covered the entire planet. But the most compelling evidence came from the chemistry of carbonate rocks formed immediately after the glacial periods. These limestones show dramatic shifts in the ratios of carbon isotopes, signatures that can only be explained by the sudden resumption of massive biological productivity after a long period when photosynthesis had nearly ceased. The rocks literally preserve the chemical fingerprint of life exploding back into activity after the global freeze. Iron formations provide another line of evidence. Layers of rust-red rock that form only when iron-rich deep ocean water suddenly encounters oxygen-rich surface water. These formations appear at exactly the moments when the ice sheets melted, suggesting that the deep oceans had become anoxic during the glaciations and were suddenly reoxidized when biological productivity resumed. Perhaps most remarkably, the magnetic orientations preserved in these ancient rocks tell a story of continental drift during the ice ages. The continents didn't remain stationary during the tens of millions of years of glaciation. They continued their slow dance across the planet's surface, sometimes crossing from one hemisphere to another while locked beneath miles of ice. The magnetic signatures allow scientists to reconstruct not just when the ice existed, but where each piece of land was located during the glacial periods. The story written in these rocks has revolutionized our understanding of Earth's history and life's resilience. It reveals that the planet's climate system has tipping points, thresholds beyond which small changes can trigger massive, rapid alterations. It demonstrates that life not only survives global catastrophes, but uses them as opportunities for evolutionary innovation. It shows that the most severe challenges can become catalysts for the greatest advances in complexity and diversity. Each glaciation tested different aspects of life's resilience and selected for different innovations. The Sturtian event, with its 60 million year duration, selected for patience and metabolic efficiency, organisms that could remain dormant for geological ages, that could extract energy from the most marginal resources, that could maintain genetic diversity through extreme population bottlenecks. These were the Sturtian survivors. The shorter but more severe Marinoan glaciation, selected for adaptability and cooperation. The rapid onset meant that only organisms capable of quick responses and mutual support could reach the refugia. The more complex pre-glacial biosphere meant that successful survivors had to master sophisticated ecological interactions. the Marinoan refugees were not just hardy individuals, but skilled ecosystem engineers. The cumulative effect of multiple snowball events was to create a biosphere far more resilient and innovative than would have been possible under stable conditions. Each glaciation pruned away the inflexible and the uncooperative, while rewarding those organisms capable of adapting quickly and working together effectively. The survivors carried genetic innovations from each glacial period, accumulating a toolkit of survival strategies unmatched in Earth's history. By the end of the Neoproterozoic era, life possessed capabilities that seemed almost magical compared to the simple bacteria and algae of earlier periods. Multicellularity allowed organisms to achieve sizes and complexities previously impossible. Sexual reproduction accelerated evolution by orders of magnitude. Symbiotic partnerships enabled organisms to combine different metabolic strategies within single bodies. Sophisticated chemical communication allowed coordination between individuals and species. All of these innovations were forged in the crucible of the snowball glaciations. The long winters beneath the ice were not periods of stagnation, but times of intense evolutionary experimentation. The refugia were not mere hideouts, but laboratories where life developed the capabilities that would fuel the Cambrian explosion and all subsequent biological diversity. The multiple snowball events also reveal something profound about the relationship between crisis and creativity throughout natural history. Each glaciation appeared to be an ending. The death of the biosphere, the failure of life's long experiment on Earth. But each became a beginning, a reset that cleared away old limitations and enabled new forms of organization and complexity. This pattern would repeat throughout Earth's history. The asteroid impact that ended the age of dinosaurs cleared ecological space for mammals to diversify. The volcanic catastrophes that triggered mass extinctions also created new chemical environments that favored different forms of life. Crisis and opportunity are often the same event, distinguished only by the time frame and perspective from which they're viewed. As we conclude our journey through the snowball glaciations, consider how this pattern might apply to the challenges facing your own time. The current mass extinction and climate disruption appear catastrophic from the perspective of existing ecosystems and human civilizations, but they may also be clearing space for new forms of organization, new partnerships between species, new ways of living that are currently unimaginable. The lesson of the snowball events is not that catastrophe is good, but that life possesses a creativity and resilience that can transform even the most severe challenges into opportunities for growth and innovation. What matters is not avoiding change. Change is inevitable in a dynamic system, but developing the adaptability to turn constraint into catalyst, crisis into creativity. The ice always melts eventually, but what emerges from the thaw is not what went in. It's something new, something more complex and capable and beautiful than existed before. This is the deepest teaching of the snowball Earth. That endings can be beginnings, that winter can be preparation for an unimaginably rich spring. As I prepare to return you to your own time, I want to share what we can learn from this journey through Earth's most extreme climate event. The snowball Earth was not a single incident, but a series of global glaciations, each lasting millions of years, each driving life to the very brink of extinction. Yet life not only endured, but used these crises as catalysts for innovation. I drift once more above this post-snowball world, observing the patterns that will shape all subsequent Earth history. The continents, scoured clean by ice and remodeled by catastrophic erosion, bear little resemblance to their pre-snowball configurations. Mountain ranges have been ground down to their roots. New rift valleys have opened where the ice's weight cracked the crust. The very foundations of the land have been renewed. In the oceans, the chemical revolution continues. The massive carbon burial events that ended the Snowball have changed ocean chemistry fundamentally. Calcium levels have risen to the point where organisms can easily build shells and skeletons from calcium carbonate. This innovation, impossible in the low calcium oceans before the Snowball, will trigger an arms race of biological mineralization. I observe early experiments in skeleton building. A microscopic organism secretes tiny scales of calcium carbonate, perhaps originally for ballast or protection from UV radiation. But the scales prove useful for defense against predators, and soon elaborate armored forms appear. The age of shells and bones is beginning, all made possible by the chemical changes wrought by the Snowball Earth. The atmosphere, too, has been transformed. The wild swings in carbon dioxide have been damped by massive weathering, but oxygen levels are rising steadily as photosynthetic life blooms. By 580 million years ago, atmospheric oxygen will reach levels capable of supporting large, active animals. The stage is being set for complex life as you know it, but perhaps the most profound legacy of the Snowball Earth is invisible. The genetic innovations that evolved in those scattered refugia. I think of the cells that learned to cooperate, forming the first true multicellular organisms in the darkness beneath the ice. Their descendants will become every plant, animal, and fungus on Earth. I think of the metabolic flexibility evolved under extreme conditions. Cells that could switch between different energy sources, tolerate huge ranges of temperature and salinity, enter dormancy when conditions deteriorated. These capabilities, forged in the crucible of the Snowball, provide the adaptability that allows life to colonize every environment on Earth. I think of the symbioses formed when resources were scarce and cooperation meant survival. The mitochondria in every one of your cells are monuments to partnerships formed in the refugia of the Snowball Earth. So are the chloroplasts in every plant, the result of ancient cells learning to work together rather than compete. The Snowball Earth was evolution's greatest stress test. It pushed life to its absolute limits, culling the inflexible and rewarding innovation. The survivors weren't necessarily the strongest or the most efficient. They were the most adaptable, the most cooperative, the most creative in finding new ways to survive. This is a lesson that resonates across deep time. Mass extinctions and global catastrophes are not just endings, they are beginnings. They clear ecological space for new forms to emerge. They create selective pressures that drive rapid evolution. They force life to innovate or perish. In your time, as human activities trigger what many call the sixth mass extinction, it's worth remembering the lessons of the Snowball Earth. Yes, the current changes are rapid and devastating to existing ecosystems. Yes, countless species will be lost forever, each one a unique experiment in living that can never be recovered. But life itself is extraordinarily resilient. It has survived freezing, boiling, poisoning, bombardment from space. It has endured ice ages and hothouse periods, asteroid impacts and volcanic catastrophes. Each time it has emerged changed but undefeated, often more diverse and complex than before. This is not to excuse the damage being done. Every species lost diminishes the richness of the world, but it provides perspective. Life will continue beyond humanity, just as it continued beyond the Snowball Earth. The question is what form that continuation will take, and whether humans will be part of it. The Snowball Earth also teaches us about the interconnectedness of Earth systems. The glaciation was triggered by seemingly minor changes. Continents moving, volcanic activity waning, weathering rates increasing. But these small changes pushed the climate past a tipping point, creating a runaway feedback loop that remade the world. Similarly, the end of the snowball came from the slow accumulation of volcanic gases, building up until they overcame the ice albedo feedback. The melt, when it came, was catastrophically rapid. Earth's climate system has these tipping points, thresholds beyond which change accelerates dramatically. In your time, as greenhouse gases accumulate and ice sheets shrink, you are approaching such tipping points. The lessons of the Snowball Earth suggest that climate change may not be gradual and predictable, but punctuated by rapid transitions to new states. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for navigating the future. But perhaps the most inspiring lesson of the Snowball Earth is about potential. Before the ice, life was relatively simple. Microbes, algae, and a few experimental multicellular forms. After the ice, life exploded in creativity. The Cambrian explosion, the colonization of land, the evolution of consciousness, all can trace their roots to innovations forged during the Snowball Earth. Crisis unleashed creativity. Limitation sparked innovation. Near extinction led to explosive diversification. The worst thing that had ever happened to life became the catalyst for its greatest achievements. As you face the challenges of your time, climate change, mass extinction, environmental degradation, remember that these crises also contain the seeds of transformation. Not transformation back to what was, but forward to what might be. The future will not look like the past, any more than the post-Snowball world resembled what came before. Human consciousness itself is part of the legacy of the Snowball Earth. The cooperative behaviors that evolved in refugia, the complex multicellularity that emerged under stress, the metabolic innovations that allowed cells to support larger bodies and more active lifestyles. All these laid the groundwork for the evolution of nervous systems, brains, and eventually consciousness. You are able to contemplate the Snowball Earth because your ancestors survived it. Every cell in your body carries molecular machinery refined in those ancient refugia. Your ability to cooperate, to adapt, to innovate. These are gifts from organisms that refuse to surrender to the ice. As our journey together ends, I leave you with this thought. The Snowball Earth seemed like the end of the world, and in many ways it was. The warm, stable world that preceded it was gone forever. But it was also a beginning. The beginning of complex life, of ecological diversity, of the biological richness that makes Earth unique. Endings and beginnings are often the same thing, seen from different perspectives. What matters is not avoiding change. Change is inevitable. But how we respond to it. Do we, like those ancient microbes, find new ways to cooperate? Do we develop new capabilities to meet new challenges? Do we use crisis as a catalyst for transformation? The choice is yours, as it was theirs. But know that you carry within you the legacy of survivors, innovators, and cooperators who faced the ultimate winter and emerged to create a new world. Their resilience flows in your veins. Their creativity sparks in your neurons. Their story is your story, written in DNA across 3.5 billion years. Rest now, knowing you are part of this great continuity. When you wake, you will still be in your warm room, your temperate world, your brief moment in the sun, but you will know, as few do, how precious and precarious this warmth is, and how life persists even when warmth fails. The ice always melts eventually. Spring always comes. Life always finds a way. These are the promises written in stone and ice and DNA, the legacy of the Snowball Earth, the gift of your deepest ancestors to you. As our journey together draws to its close, I want to leave you with one final meditation on what this ancient story means for your modern soul. You came to this tale seeking rest, seeking escape from the pressures of your daily world. But perhaps you have found something more, a deeper understanding of what it means to persist, to hope, to trust in processes larger than your immediate perception. The Snowball Earth was not just a planetary crisis, it was a crisis of hope itself. Imagine what it meant for those early organisms to live in a world where every signal, every piece of evidence, suggested that warmth would never return. The ice had persisted for millions of years with no sign of change. The conditions that had supported life for billions of years had vanished completely. Any reasonable organism would have concluded that the old world was gone forever. Yet life persisted not because it could foresee the eventual thaw, but because persistence is life's fundamental nature. The bacteria in the hydrothermal vents didn't maintain their communities because they knew the ice would eventually melt. They maintained them because maintaining life is what life does, regardless of external circumstances. They embodied hope not as an emotion or a prediction, but as a way of being. This teaches us something profound about the nature of hope itself. Hope is not optimism, the belief that things will necessarily improve. Hope is not prediction, the calculation that current trends will lead to better outcomes. Hope is something deeper, the commitment to keep building, keep growing, keep creating value and beauty, regardless of whether we can see how our efforts will ultimately matter. The organisms in the refugia were practicing what we might call blind hope. Persistence in the absence of evidence that persistence will be rewarded. They maintained complex ecosystems, developed new capabilities, formed partnerships that might never be tested in the larger world. They lived as if the future mattered even when they had no proof that there would be a future. This kind of hope requires a fundamental trust in processes larger than immediate experience. The bacteria couldn't know that volcanic outgassing was slowly building the greenhouse gases that would eventually melt the ice. They couldn't know that their own metabolic innovations were creating the toolkit that would enable the Cambrian explosion. They acted on faith that their small efforts were part of a larger story, whose ending they couldn't predict or control. In your own life, you face moments that require this same kind of blind hope. Times when the evidence suggests that your efforts are futile, that the problems you face are too large, that the changes you seek will never come. The Snowball Earth teaches us that these moments are precisely when hope becomes most essential. Not hope as wishful thinking, but hope as committed action in the face of uncertainty. The refugia also teach us about the importance of tending small spaces with great care. The hydrothermal vent communities occupied areas smaller than city blocks, yet they maintained the genetic and ecological diversity that would eventually repopulate an entire planet. They remind us that we don't need to save the whole world at once. We need to tend carefully to the small spaces entrusted to our care. Your own refugia might be the relationships you nurture, the skills you develop, the values you practice, the beauty you create. These may seem insignificant against the scale of global problems, but the Snowball Earth teaches us that small spaces of integrity and creativity can preserve possibilities that seem lost, can develop capabilities that seem irrelevant, can maintain connections that seem broken. The symbiotic partnerships that evolved in the refugia offer another profound teaching. In the face of scarcity and stress, the survivors were not the strongest individuals, but the best collaborators. They learned that their own flourishing was inseparable from the flourishing of others. they discovered that sharing resources, rather than hoarding them, increased everyone's chances of survival. This wisdom challenges many of the assumptions of your competitive culture. In difficult times, the natural human tendency is often to protect what we have, to compete for scarce resources, to prioritize our own needs over others. But the ancient refugia suggests that this strategy, while it may work in the short term, is ultimately self-defeating. The organisms that survived 20 million years of ice did so by learning to give as well as receive, to support as well as take support. The lesson extends beyond individual relationships to entire civilizations. The challenges facing your world, climate change, social inequality, political division, require the same kind of cooperative innovation that evolved in the Snowball refugia. The solutions will not come from any individual or nation acting alone, but from new forms of partnership that seem impossible until they become inevitable. The multiple Snowball events also teach us about the relationship between crisis and creativity. Each glaciation appeared to be an ending, but became a beginning. Each catastrophe cleared away old limitations and enabled new forms of complexity. The pattern suggests that what we experience as breakdown may actually be breakthrough. The dissolution of old forms that no longer serve to make space for new possibilities. This perspective doesn't minimize the reality of loss and suffering during times of crisis. Many organisms died during each Snowball event. Entire ecosystems vanished forever. The pain and disruption were real, but the larger story reveals that even these losses served a purpose. They cleared ecological niches for new experiments, freed resources for different approaches, created selective pressures that drove innovation. Your own times of crisis may follow a similar pattern. The breakdown of familiar structures, whether in personal life, work, relationships, or society, can feel like pure loss. But seen from a larger perspective, these breakdowns may be clearing space for new forms of organization, new capabilities, new relationships that wouldn't be possible while the old structures remained intact. The key insight is that we don't have to choose between grieving what's lost and embracing what's emerging. We can do both simultaneously. We can mourn the passing of the old while preparing for the birth of the new. The organisms in the refugia carried the genetic legacy of lost ecosystems while developing capabilities for ecosystems not yet born. Perhaps most importantly, the Snowball Earth teaches us about time itself. The glaciations lasted millions of years, spans of time so vast they challenge human comprehension. Yet they were temporary. The ice always melted eventually. The lesson is not that all problems resolve quickly, but that even the most severe conditions are subject to change when viewed on a sufficient scale. This offers a different relationship to time than our hurried culture typically provides. Instead of expecting immediate results from our efforts, we can work with the patience of geological processes. Instead of measuring progress in days or years, we can think in terms of generations and centuries. Instead of demanding proof that our actions will succeed, we can trust that our contributions join a larger flow of creativity and transformation that operates on scales beyond our individual lives. The organisms in the refugia worked with this geological patience. They maintained their communities, not because they could see immediate results, but because they were participating in processes larger than themselves. They embodied a kind of faith that transcends individual lifespan. Faith in life itself, in evolution's creativity, in the universe's tendency toward increasing complexity and consciousness. You are invited to participate in this same faith. The challenges facing your world require responses that may not show results in your lifetime. The carbon you reduce, the relationships you heal, the skills you develop, the beauty you create. These contributions join a vast collaborative effort that spans generations and continents and centuries. Your part may seem small, but it's essential to the larger pattern. As our journey together ends, remember that you are both heir to the ancient persistence and contributor to its ongoing expression. The resilience that carried life through the Snowball Earth lives in your DNA, flows in your bloodstream, sparks in your neurons. You have access to patience that spans geological ages, creativity that can transform crisis into opportunity, hope that doesn't depend on immediate evidence of success. The refugia are still with us, and you are one of them. In your choices to remain creative under pressure, to cooperate rather than compete, to tend small spaces with great care, to maintain hope when evidence is scarce. In all of this, you continue the great work that began in the darkness beneath the ice. You are helping to preserve and develop capabilities that future generations will need, participating in partnerships that may outlast the challenges that created them. The ice always melts eventually, but what emerges from the thaw is never what went into the freeze. It's something new, something more capable and diverse and beautiful than before. This is the promise and the responsibility of your time, to be both guardian of what's precious from the past and midwife to what wants to be born in the future. Trust in the timing that operates on scales larger than personal urgency. Rest in the persistence that flows deeper than individual will. Find hope not just in your own strength, but in the vast collaborative project of existence, of which you are an essential part, a unique voice in the choir of being that has been singing for billions of years and will sing for billions more. Sleep well, knowing you are part of this great continuity. When you wake, you will still be in your warm room, your complex world, your brief but precious moment in the sun. But you will carry with you the deeper knowing that warmth is earned through patience in the cold, that spring always follows winter, that life always finds a way through whatever comes. The story continues in you. Until we meet again in the deep rivers of time, I am the Chrononaut, your guide through Earth's memories. Sleep well, child of the great thaw, heir to the age of ice, witness to the resilience of life. Rest in the warmth that your ancestors earned through their patience in the cold. Rest